अगर ये 5 principles आपको याद है ना, any day you can write an answer on natural selection, any day. He says evolution happens by natural selection. Natural selection मतलब आपके पेपर में होगा ही होगा. Right? You cannot write a paper 1 of anthropology without somehow factoring this in. मतलब कहीं ना कहीं तो ये है. So he proposes and then he realizes that यहाँ पे evolution हुआ है. Okay, and then he is going to propose the most important theory. मतलब आपके पेपर में ये जाएगा for sure. Sometimes it could be a paragraph, sometimes it could be an answer, it could be a long answer, it could be a very long answer, but ये तो होगा. Okay, Darwin's ideas are something that you will be incorporating in your answer. Your evaluator in UPSC is not going to think कि कितना facts dump किया है इस student ने. They are basically going to see whether you understand and appreciate the essence of anthropology. All you got to do, I've given you 3 questions. 2 questions are mandatory assignments. One is a 15 marker about Lamarckism, and the other question is going to be a 15 marker of Darwinism. Hello guys, good morning. Good morning to all. See, today is going to be day 1, right? So the previous session that we had was essentially your orientation. How do we go about this? The lectures are generally, is order mein hota hai, right? So it's basically you're going to start with some sort of a quiz, right? So as soon as we start, okay, I say good morning, you say good morning, and then we basically go to quiz. But since we have not covered anything, there is a quiz, okay, but generally we'll have that particular quiz. And once that quiz is done, right, and that quiz is essentially the topics that we have covered in the previous session or the previous, let's say it's a Saturday ka class, it could be Tuesday, it could be Thursday ka topics, right? So it's something along those lines. The reason I keep that quiz is just to ensure that, your mind is slowly coming back to anthropology, right? So once I get you there, and then I want to sort of recap. So quiz ke baad, we'll basically have some sort of a recap, jahan pe I'll basically give you the essence of what has been discussed. That becomes the context for where we are heading this particular week or this particular class. वो जब हो जाता है, after that I'm going to sort of end with a quick recap of what we have seen, followed by some questions that you've got to answer, right? Questions for your assignment. Now the questions for your assignment are basically going to be given in the handout most of the time, but अगर मुझे कुछ देना है, I will basically give you there, okay? Or we'll at least say कि okay, these are the kind of questions. The kind of question that you are required to write is basically one question on every topic, even as a 10 marker, 15 marker, ठीक है, अगर आपको 20 करना है तो 20 कर लीजिए, but I would suggest that 15 is going to be more common, right? So 15 से थोड़ा कम करोगे, you're going to be able to write the same topic in a 10 marker. 15 से थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा करोगे तो थोड़ा सा explanation ज़्यादा दोगे, that basically becomes your 20 marker, right? So 15 is basically ideal. 10 या 15, that is basically what I want you to practice. Okay, the second you go into 20, right, you will have lots and lots and lots of content, and that becomes very difficult for you to cut down a little later. I'm going to be very strict with word limit as well. Okay, all those things at the end. Today is going to be a biological anthropology. I am going to actually start with the quiz, but before that, I will give you some pointers on what is expected, how to make the most out of it, what I am expecting you to do behind the scenes. Okay, behind the camera, while you're sitting there, okay, in front of your screen, what exactly are you supposed to do? See, the first thing is that pehle get a notebook. Okay, and when you get a notebook, try to see to it that you try to get those UPSC ka sheets, right? So usko spiral bind karke you try to have your notes, right? So from the very beginning, you try to keep those notes to be exactly the kind of ones that you will be writing. It is something that you're going to be writing in your final exam. So starting say you try to become comfortable with it. Okay, now if you feel ki nahi, mera notes is something different and I'm more comfortable here, that is fine. But assignments at least has to be written in those UPSC kind of sheets. What are UPSC kind of sheets? Now let us say that you can go online, download it, I'll basically send you one and you guys can download it and you can print it. Okay, I'll leave it to you, but basically the idea is that, let's say you don't want to print it in that kind of manner, you should still have like a border of 1 inch of these A4 sheets and usko spiral bind karke aap rakh sakte ho, and you basically write on that. So all your assignments have to be basically written in that, not in a diary, not in a different kind of a notebook, not in rule sheets, like ye sab nahi. Like, from the very beginning, we'll keep it, catered towards your UPSC wala thing. Okay, the reason why I say this is that it is very easy to sort of keep track of how many words are you putting in a page, right? So kitna likhna hai aapko for a 10 marker, 15 marker, 20 marker is something that will be easily, you can gauge it easily. So that is the first thing. So this is basically notebook. So what are you going to do in the notebook, which is not your assignment wala book? Notebook is basically where you start noting down things that we discuss here, what I basically dictate to you, whatever I want to add here, right? And anything else from, from class. right? You will not write directly into the handouts, right? So handouts में directly आप लिखो मत, okay? Handouts are basically like your Bhagavad Gita, your Bible, it's your Quran, right? So it's going to be something that is going to be with you until your final attempt, right? Until you decide not to write, okay? So आपका हो गया, okay? You're in the system, then it is fine, ठीक है? But until then, you try to keep this very neat, okay? And when you're writing in your handout, थोड़ा सा do it after class, have your lunch, बैठ के आपको लिखना है. Just try to see to it that you're basically using different colored pens, right? I have seen this, especially with students who have cleared, and then I take a look at how they maintain in class, right? It is generally very neat. Okay, so color coding, okay, something. So see, color coding is something jahan pe, let us say, sometimes I give you a scholar and a scholar ka interpretation, scholar ka perspective. You try to keep that in one color, and that could be, let's say, red. Okay, you take color 2, color 3, color 4, it's up to you. Okay, but that color coding, you ensure that this is maintained throughout. So let's say that you have color 1 is equal to your, let's say, some scholarly interpretation, okay, your perspective. Okay, let's say I'm going to give you color 2, okay, whatever is your favorite color, or whatever is the pens that is available in the market, right? Okay, so this is going to be this one. So let's say if you want to sort of see, so let's say later in life, after your prelims of next year, you're like, see, I'm a little short of examples. I'm not getting those examples like really quick. So what do you have to do? You basically have to scan your color 2s. That is all you got to do. Flip through, flip through, flip through. You're basically going to get, all your examples. If you feel like, your answers just don't have that scholarly rigor that is required of a paper that is required to be of a master's level, then what you've got to do? Okay, that is your color 1. You just have to scan through that, and you will get a very quick sort of revision that is done. Okay, color 3 can be, color 4 can be, other things. So let's say that I'm basically giving you some other kind of value add, or something I'm dictating. Let's say that I give you, we discuss some assignments. You guys have written so and so. Let's say you have written Lamarck in so and so, Darwin in so and so. I felt that there is a little bit of a room to improve in, let us say, the introduction, in the conclusion, in the criticism, something along these lines, right? So then I would sort of sometimes even dictate कि आप ऐसे लिख सकते हो as a sample. But of course you want to learn it by yourself. But अगर आप मैं ऐसा कर रहा हूँ, तो this is something, and you can basically keep this for others. Later you might also write something on it. So is this kind of clear? So this is something, मतलब class में मत करो, like, because this takes some time, but इसका benefit you will get to a great extent later. So in case you want to revise, you will know exactly what you're looking at, right? So that is something that you can easily do. So this is basically what it is. And then you're going to have, basically you'll have two things, okay? AK handouts, and I've not decided what I'm going to call the other one. Okay, this is going to be for your, ये करोगे आपको, you should be able to, aim for a 300. You should be aim for a, let's say, I think we said by the end of your November 24th, right? So whatever was that date, yeah, 20th, right? So whichever is that particular date, I'm going to say that, by then you should be at a point jahan pe you are confident that you can write many answers. 280 tak to aap pahunchoge, right? Let's say, 300 plus target karna hai na. So this is going to be that thing. Right? Anything else I feel is not really part of it, but let's say कि मतलब थोड़ा सा extra reading अगर आपको करना है, something if I want to give you, I'll give it to you as something else, but that is not your handouts. वो something else के लिए I will come out with a title for it. Okay, so I'm not sure exactly what I will do, but this is basically what you have to study. Okay, ये आपने touch भी नहीं किया, I'm totally fine with it. ठीक है, I'm just going to give you, but I want to make that distinction. I don't want to make your handouts bulky. Okay, this is. We will try our best, okay? मतलब थोड़ा सा bulk तो होगा, okay? But it should not be bulky enough that you will not be able to do a quick sort of revision of your entire, मतलब the conceptual clarity, everything else that you need in order to be able to write an answer in, मतलब 3 दिन में अगर आपको करना है, right? You should be able to just go through these things very, very quick. So we'll keep a target maybe 500 pages, okay? But you give me maybe 100 pages का buffer भी दे दो आप. ठीक है, maybe I don't know exactly where it is going to be, right? So every batch is going to be different, okay? But this is something like this, right? So anything else that I don't want to keep in here, it will be here. So this is for your fun reading, this is for whatever extra knowledge, right? So in case you want to go through it, it's fine. But never ever read this until you're done with this, right? So this is basically what I'm expecting you. This is basically just some extra stuff. It is very easy to sort of like pump out material and then give, and it just makes students' life a lot harder, right? You don't know what to revise, what is more important, what is less important, what should be the crux of your answer, right? You should not be scanning through this in order to write an answer for your topic. You should be scanning through this in your head. right? So agar aapka picture memory ban raha hai, your photographic memory that is there, it should be this, right? So this is matlab, priority mein this is like number 10. Okay, if this is number 1, now there are like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 could be so many other things, but this is like number 10, not important. Okay, so have you taken your notebook and have you written these notes down? Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide and then you're not going to have access to this. So this is going to be your syllabus 1 point. Okay, so we are basically starting with human evolution. So biological anthropology, generally, if you see, it is, there are a few components here. Okay, so we are basically going to divide this into mostly biological. Okay, but I'm removing some portions of it, which I will basically study with. I'll teach you guys along with another particular topic, and these are basically 2 parts. Okay, it is the human evolution care related topics, which is going to be your primates, okay, and your hominins. Like it might be a term that you guys don't know, so I'm just going to say Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Australopithecines, right? These kind of, so they are called hominins. So hominin fossils. Okay, so these 2. Okay, so this is part of your biological evolution, but we will actually study them along with your archaeology topic. Okay, it makes a lot of sense because yahan pe this part is your biological evolution. Okay, and this part is going to be your cultural evolution. You have a lot of ability to sort of interconnect both of these. So yeah, this is the part. So there is ability to interconnect here. Okay. Okay, so this is going to be a module, this is going to be another sort of module, right? So this is going to be another module. So if I come here and I basically begin with my pen drive, okay, so I'll be using PPT as well, okay, and like whatever is in PPT is going to be like parts of what you have in your handout. So yahan se aapko kuch bhi nahi likhna hai, right? Nothing of this is going to be written. This is basically like, let's say 20% of what is in your handout, right? So I basically take chunks of what I'm going to give you and I'm going to take it here and I'm going to basically explain with the PPT and basically the green screen, right? So this is basically what we have. Now tell me, what is anthropology? So we basically said anthropology is anthropology is what? So I like this definition, which it says it is a discipline of infinite curiosity about human beings, right? So you are very curious about different aspects of human beings and you're trying to study them in a very systematic kind of manner. That is going to be your anthropology, right? Now there are some definitions and all of those things, we'll get to it. But the idea here is that you're studying man, right? So man as in mankind. Okay, so if I say man, yahan pe it is essentially mankind. Okay, it's the term that they had used in the beginning. You can call it humankind also. Okay, so we can be inclusive here. But again, that is basically what it is. So etymology wise, agar aap dekhoge, anthropos, okay, which basically means humans, right? And then logia especially means a systematic or a scientific sort of study of it, right? So this is basically that. So yahan pe we are going to have a few modules, right? So this is particularly a breakup of a particular scholar. Okay, so this is called the 4-part division of Franz Boas. Again, no need to worry about this. I'm just giving you a context of how I'm going into biological anthropology and telling you how the course is organized, right? So you have archaeology, cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, and linguistic anthropology. He was an American anthropologist, and American anthropology mein, they have this 4-part division. Okay, Hamara influence is a little more the British side. So what do we call it? Archaeological anthropology, and then you're going to say socio-cultural anthropology, then you're going to say biological anthropology, and then linguistic anthropology. So this is our syllabus mein, okay? But this is basically the part, which is the part that we are going to discuss. We are going to start with the biological anthropology. Now I've set the tone, right? So biological anthropology mein, you have most of your bio that we're going to start discussing, but there is a particular part which is your primates and your hominin fossils and all of that, which we will cover along with the cultural evolution, so that we can interconnect that. Okay, there will be a lot of similarity there. Before I go into evolution and ask you what does evolution mean to you, I am going to come back here. Okay, there is going to be 5 modules. So one module is going to be, okay, these are the modules, and not exactly in the order in which we are going to go, okay, but I'll just list them down. So paper 1, did we already do this in the previous session, the orientation? If we have, then no need. Just let me know if we have discussed this. Okay, module 1 is biological anthro. Then you have another module which is your social cultural anthropology. Social cultural anthropology is basically studying your marriage, kinship, and family, and the political sort of institutions in different kind of societies, the economic institutions in different kind of societies, the religious institutions in different kind of societies. All that is basically done here. Okay, so this is also going to be in your paper 1. उसके बाद आई एम गोइंग टू हैव स्पेसिफिक एम्फेसिस ऑन थियरीज, थोड़ा सा हम डिटेल में करेंगे, राइट? एंड एंड थियरीज में अंडरस्टैंडिंग इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, राइट? सो थियरीज, okay, so theories are there, right? So theory is basically what you have, and some miscellaneous topics, right? So theories, you'll have your linguistic, in comparison to your other kind of modules now, it's a very small chapter, मतलब 5 topics honge, right? So you understand that, right? Okay, so there's not much in your linguistic anthropology here, right? So that is that. Along with this, we have research methods. So meaning, let us say that you want to go and do your socio-cultural anthropology ka study, right? So in case you are a practicing anthropologist, what would be the tools that you would use in order to go and study another society, or to study biological anthropology, okay, or to study archaeological anthropology, all these kind of things. ये हम पढ़ेंगे आपके research methods में, right? So participant observation क्या है, questionnaire क्या है, schedules क्या है, surveys क्या है, life history क्या है, so these kind of things, genealogy, these kind of things is basically what we'll have here. And then you will have your basic topics, which is like what is anthro, that kind of topics. Okay, basics as in इसमें you have to study कि मतलब मैं बताता हूँ कि यहाँ पे आपको करना क्या है, right? So this is very simple, but you will once you look at all of these things now, this becomes very, very simple. Okay, so very, very simple, right? Now paper 2 में you're going to have, so paper 2 essentially has 2 major modules. Okay, one is going to be Indian society, so this is okay, and then you have your tribal society in particular. Okay, so what do we have? You have Indian society, and then you have tribal society of India in particular. Generally, in most of your optionals, okay, liberal arts optionals, right? So one is basically the theory aspects, right? The concepts and all of that, and then the second part is going to be the Indian application, right? So that is going to be your paper 2, and it is no different in your anthropology as well. So you have your Indian society here, you have tribal society of India in particular here, right? So now there is going to be one module, and I'm going to draw that slightly in a different color. Okay, this is going to be so you have archaeological anthropology, and then the primates and the hominins that we just talked about. You're going to have that as a combined sort of a module, right? So essentially what you have is that, so just to give you an example, let's say you take archaeological anthropology. In archaeological anthropology, you will have those of you who have actually done your GS, can you just give me a real quick idea how many of you have basically started your GS ka preparation? Are you guys doing classes parallelly? Have you already finished it? Are you yet to begin? Are you starting with anthropology? Give me some sort of an idea. I just want to get a general sort of feel, okay, how it is, right? So for those of you who have basically done your GS, or at least started your GS, so history agar aap kar rahe ho, you will basically start from the most ancient, right? So most ancient mein aap dekhoge, you will have Indus Valley civilization will be in your book, whichever book that you're using. It might be 4th chapter, 5th chapter. It's so far back, but it will still be your 4th chapter, it will be 5th chapter, right? Why so? Because before that we had this Stone Age, Metal Age ke pehle we basically had Stone Age, and it was a long duration, right? Us samay humans did not even look like this, right? If I may use the word human, right? So what happens there? So you have Paleolithic phase, you have Mesolithic phase, you have Neolithic phase. Neolithic is basically the one that onset of agriculture. Now you will have this lower Paleolithic, middle Paleolithic, upper Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic in your GS. You will have it, in your world ka this thing in your paper 1. At the same time, you'll have specific sort of sites in India as well, right? So that is going to be both, and the features are going to be the same, right? GS mein padhoge to it is going to be less detailed, okay? Optional mein padhoge, master's level paper, more detailed, okay? So paper 1 mein padhoge world ka this thing, but the features are the same. Neolithic, whether it is in India, whether it is in other parts of the world, it is going to be the onset of agriculture. So the features are basically the same. Okay, there will be some regional variations. India, South Asia might be slightly different in some way, right? So this is going to be a combined module. Same thing here as well. So so lower Paleolithic is a phase jahan pe you have a particular hominin called the Homo erectus, right? So Homo habilis also, but Homo habilis is not part of a syllabus, so let's not bother about it at the moment. But you have Homo erectus in Africa, you have Homo erectus in Europe, you have Homo erectus in Far East, you have Homo erectus in India, right? So the ones in India are syllabus, right, in your paper 2. Okay, the ones who are elsewhere are basically another one. So I don't want to sort of like do one particular topic alone in another one, right? I want you to sort of study all the Homo erectus in like one go, because the features are kind of similar. It will be easier for you to be able to sort of compare, contrast, right? You know, you will be able to see the relationship. Okay, so is this like is everybody aware now ki how, what exactly is the module going to be like? So this is your module, okay, 3, okay, 4, 5, 6, so 6 modules, right? So along with your course you'll also have 6 tests, मान लो, ठीक है? So you know, right after a particular module I would want you to sort of try writing those answers as well. Of course, you don't want to be writing your first answers on the test. You have to be sending it through email as assignments, right? So this is basically what we are going to do here. So the biological part that we are going to talk about, okay, so हम यहाँ से start करेंगे. Our syllabus is not necessarily arranged in a very logical sort of order. So, you know, we have to go in some sort of logical wala this thing, jahan pe you're not jumping, right? You know, so we'll do it in such thoda sa logical manner hum karenge, right? So this is basically what we are going to do now. Okay, we are basically going to start with evolution. List out the 5 steps that we talked about, and the sequence should also be right. See, yahan pe point number 1 is basically class. Okay, remember this as CCC, ठीक है? Class and conceptual clarity. Okay, you guys missed this part. Okay, so even today you will basically have to sort of focus on the conceptual clarity, right? So matlab, this is the main sort of focus here, okay, in class. Okay, second thing is going to be basically what? Start working on, let's say, internalizing certain things, reading, okay, handouts, okay, your color-coded notes. Will you be writing color-coded notes in class? Okay, no, that is not the expectation. Third one is going to be, how many of you said short notes and then assignments? Okay, assignments first, guys. Okay, ठीक है. So you know, you will understand that by the time you know you do all of these things, you know, it's going to be very difficult, right? So for you to sort of like keep up with your GS and your anthro, UPSC life is going to be something jahan pe you're balancing things, right? So let's say if something is going missing, okay, this particular week, it cannot be your assignments. It can be your short notes. Short notes is something that you can still make later, unless you write an assignment, na, it will not feel like you know you have gotten the complete hold of it. I have students who are in the list, एक mains में जिन्होंने clear किया है, who used to tell me, sir, the ones that I skipped, those are the ones that are still giving me a little bit of trouble, right? I'm saying कि मतलब trouble नहीं है, you know, if you go through it now, it will be there, but that's psychologically, right? The ones that you have, you know, long ago you have seen it, done it, right? उसमें एक आपको एक hold का feeling, you know, you will basically have that, okay? And the ones that you have not done it during that class, so it will be relatively less, right? So assignments are more important. Then you basically make your short notes, and then the last one is going to be, let's say, एक test. Okay, nothing is timed. At this particular point, you're basically trying to focus on bringing quality, right? So time ke liye, you will work on this in the next phase. The next phase is going to be your QEP type thing, right? So that is basically what you will have. Abhi ke liye, what you're trying to do is that, okay, you try to do 50 pages with a decent recall, without any sort of cheat sheet, without any sort of, you know, it has to be sort of reasonably well internalized, and then get that experience of how does it feel to sort of like, you know, try to get it from here and then sort of pen it down onto your piece of paper, right? So this is basically it. So today, basically what we're going to start with is going to be, you know, the conceptual clarity in class. Okay, oops. You were not supposed to see that yet. Okay. Okay. So essentially, you know, you're going to talk about organic evolution. See, organic evolution is the first topic that we are starting with, right? So organic evolution may. So first of all, what is organic evolution? Evolution of life forms. Okay, so basically it's biological evolution. Or I would basically even put it as of organisms. Right? Somebody said that you started with geography. So wahan pe evolution ab seekhoge, what would you call that? Right? You know how, you know, when you, in case you're talking about the formation of rocks and continents and, you know, all those kind of things, that is going to be your geological evolution. Okay, so here, what is the kind of evolution that we are studying? Generally, in every subject, hum start karenge ki matlab origin and the development of those kind of ideas, right? So yahan pe it is going to be your organic evolution, right? So here you also have your biological evolution. We'll have your cultural evolution as well. Cultural evolution is something that we will study in your social cultural anthropology. Is the context kind of clear? So clearly, the focus here is going to be on biological life and how they sort of, you know, how it used to be back in the day, and, you know, how it has basically progressed, or what we call as evolved. Okay, what are the sort of drivers of this evolution? Okay, are there any sort of principles that underlie is disha mein, in this particular direction, things tend to sort of evolve, right? So this is something that we have to basically discuss, right? So that is what the scientific meaning of the word organic is in the term organic evolution. Okay. Now, let's talk about this. And I think I briefly touched upon this. Tell me, depending upon which is your religion, and you will understand that, majority of you might be Hindus, and some of you might be Christians and Muslims and maybe Buddhist and you'll have the other sort of religion as well. But even within Hinduism, you will have different sort of, it's a very heterodox kind of religion. You have ideas of how we came about, like what, how life started, right? So please tell me what exactly was told to you. Okay, I'm sure that आपके घर में you will have a grandmother who would basically tell you these tales, right? So tell me about this, right? So what exactly is it? So there is a reason I'm asking you this. See, evolution, before you study it, we have to understand that for a long duration, it was kind of considered something that you cannot really talk about. Evolution actually goes against the idea that God has placed us here as one of the God ka, what do you call it, like the masterpiece. The best thing that the God made on earth is essentially the humans. This was the old sort of thought, right? Let's say we are looking at, let's say, the 1700s, the 1600s, and so on and so forth, right? So God has created this marvelous structure, right? With two extremities and the heart and the bigger brain and the hair and the ability to stand. All these things have basically been given by God, and we are placed on earth here, okay, exactly like how God wanted us to be. Right? Okay, with all the flaws, imperfections, everything is there. Okay, it is like God ka decide, right? So anytime you basically say that nahi, hum basically we sort of like evolved from more primitive kind of features agar hum bolenge, and then we look like so and so back in the day, right? That basically goes against, that is almost like you're questioning God himself or God herself. Right? So this is something that is very, very risky, right? So this is something that so because of this, the scientific minds of the 1600s and the 1700s and 1800s did not necessarily want to basically talk about or propose any sort of idea saying that, the life had evolved in this manner or that manner by this principle or that particular principle. So for a very long duration, if somebody is going to talk about evolutionism, that person has got guts. Okay, and that person is like, he does not care what society thinks of him or thinks of her, right? So that is that. So then we basically come here, right? But the arguments that you have here and whatever you have placed in the chat window, and I'm seeing so many, right? Okay, great. And I will go through this. Yeah, so here, the idea here is that this is basically not a scientific study. This is basically more of religious study, right? So we can have this. Right, so today this is there, but your subject basically begins from accepting of evolution and the fact that who accepted evolution, who were the ones who tried to give ideas, and how great were those ideas and how flawed were those ideas, right? And who are the main sort of sort of contributors here. In this, if you can actually see, there are three parts here. One is basically going to be your pre-Darwinian theories. Second one, Darwinian theory, and third one, post-Darwinian theory. Now you've actually seen three times one word is repeating, and what is that? Okay, that is the name of Sir Charles Darwin, right? Because he has given some important ideas, and we'll talk about him in a little bit of detail here. In fact, his contribution, okay, which was the fact that evolution is by natural selection, and I'm sure that you must have come across it, at least somewhere you must have heard of it, right? So this idea of evolution by natural selection was so itna important at that particular point of time, and even today, that any theory that precedes him is clubbed as pre-Darwinian. Any theory that sort of like comes after him is clubbed as post-Darwinian. So you can imagine how important he is for understanding your evolutionism or his contribution is to that. Is that clear? Overall, in this, there are many different kind of theories, right? But the ones that you have to essentially go through in your hamare syllabus mein jo hai, that is going to be your Lamarckism. Okay, and then you have Darwin, and that's Charles Darwin himself. There was somebody else who came out with this similar sort of idea. I'll talk about it when we come to that particular topic. And yahan pe you have a lot of the contributions of the recent century. Okay? So this is basically the sequence in which we are going. So today the topic that we're going to cover is going to be your Lamarckism, and hopefully we will be able to cover your Darwinism as well, right? Okay, with a focus on conceptual clarity. So this is your Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck, or Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck, however you want to sort of pronounce it. Okay, and he had come out with a book called Philosophie, okay, Phie and Zoologique in 1809. Basically, what exactly is his idea? Okay, we'll go into that particular part. In fact, even today, you guys, for those of you who are interested, okay, that creationism ka idea. Even today in the West, there are people who believe that believing in evolutionism is like going against religion. Okay, so if you know a little bit about politics, I'll just tell you. So I was in the US, I was in university at that time, election was going on, right? And I basically come from an IIT kind of school. It's a tech school, top 10 kind of tech school. So, people who come to our university, those kind of areas, they'll basically talk about science. So once Chelsea Clinton, who was Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton's daughter, had basically come there, and she had basically made this particular point. Okay, guys, don't support Republicans, right? You have to Hillary Clinton, that's her mother, she was contesting, right? So you have to support us Democrats, right? And then she basically makes this particular point. Yesterday, or whatever, last week or whenever it was, right? So there were 11 sort of primary chal raha tha, okay, for Republicans. And there are 11 contestants on who's going to be the Republican nominee for being the president, right? So pehle to, let's say you have Donald Trump, so he has to basically contest within the Republicans to see whether he can win that, and the winner of that is going to sort of contest against the winner of the Democratic representative, like whoever it is, right? So whether it is your Hillary, whether it is Obama, like you get the picture, right? That is that. So usme se 11 people were there in the Republican Party, which is more of the conservative kind of party, right? So wahan pe, apparently out of the 11, there was a question, and I'm not sure exactly why this question was asked on stage. They used to have this, that televised debates. So how many of you guys actually believe in evolution? Okay, and then there were 8 people who basically raised their hand saying that they believe in evolution, but wo bhi aise. Okay, it's like kind of reserved. Oh my God, my constituency is going to kill me if I say that I believe in it. Okay, but if I don't, then it is like I'm going against scientific evidence. But 3 of them basically were contesting for the post of the president. Okay, they did not believe in evolution. So you can understand that creationism is a pretty important thing, and the fact that it was sort of almost pitted against evolution is surprising. And I think most of you would probably not know this, right? So very, very interesting. I think my grandmother also, okay, to a great extent, like all her kids, they got educated and all of this kind of thing. But my grandmother was born in the 1920s, right? So I think that will be like your great grandmother, okay, that particular generation. I think even my great grandmother, if there is any word that is against religion, okay, which is deeply, it's in her soul, right? Whether it be science, whether there is evidence, whether it is following the systematic scientific method, all these things doesn't matter. Okay? It is not going to be accepted, right? It is not going to be accepted, and probably it's going to increase our blood pressure, right? Same thing happened in Europe at that particular period as well. Okay, so he is trying to explain, he is basically trying to explain the idea that, what, okay guys, okay, I understood, Buffon had basically spent 75,000 years. In fact, Darwin ka grandfather, right, so he also basically gave some idea, but he did not want to publish it and, sort of be considered to be the outlaw in that society, right? You don't, so he basically said, there is some sort of evolution, Earth could possibly be a little longer, and he's like, sort of putting those ideas in poetry rather than publishing as a scientific literature, right? So yes, sab to tha. But the first person who's really given, openly, publicly coming against the, us samay ka, the social, political, religious establishment was your, Lamarck, right? So Lamarck basically comes out with his idea. His ideas of today, you might think that, okay, wo theek nahi hai, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter because he came out and he basically started this whole trend. Okay, so the first one, so he basically explains this with a few ideas. It is not exactly, like postulates given by him, but it is like further sort of like, refined and given by other sort of scholars on how to sort of best explain his idea, right? His main ideas are basically, first thing is internal urge, right? So what is internal urge, right? Every living organism has an inner desire or force to become better suited to its environment. So the first time you're basically saying that there is some sort of relationship with environment. Okay, the force of environment are going to decide, what that species is going to be over a period of time, right? So this is that. This urge basically pushes it to change or improve its body, right? The classical example of Lamarck is going to be the giraffe, right? So we'll take a look at how exactly giraffes, how he explains giraffe and what happens to it. So giraffes had a desire to reach higher leaves on the trees, so they tried to stretch their necks over generations, and this internal urge essentially helped in sort of increasing the length of the. Have you guys studied this in your 9th? I think it's an ICSE or CBSE may, I think it's like 10th, yeah, maybe in some boards it'll be like 11th, 12th. So essentially the idea is like, so he's basically proposing that, the giraffe is a very interesting sort of species, okay? So, primarily in Africa, right? So, they have these long necks, okay? The body looks kind of like, your horses, right? Okay, with the longer legs and especially those necks. And you're trying to make sense of like, why would some species have such a very long neck, right? So then he comes out with this idea that probably they had necks that were relatively shorter, maybe like the horse, okay? Reasonable, okay, not that long, okay? But there are certain kind of things that resulted in it growing it, okay, over a period of time. So one of this thing is basically this internal urge, right? We'll talk about all of these, right? So you can see the giraffe. Now, this is not how you would have imagined a giraffe, right? If you've been to a local, any of these zoos, you would have actually seen that the giraffes have this, this neck. In fact, the neck is longer than this entire body, right? Why would they have it? So he's basically proposing it. He's basically trying to give some sort of ideas on why this would have been. And I will basically go through all the reasons as well. Okay, so this is that. Second thing is, new needs are basically a reaction to this particular environment. So let's say the environment has a particular role that it plays. Okay, so internal urge to become better suited to that particular environment, and new needs are there if you sort of change the environment and so on. So for instance, what would be the environment here in this particular example? Okay, in this particular environment, what exactly is there? So for instance, okay, so you can see that the environment is such that you have to sort of get food. So where do you get the food? The food for them is basically not the grass. Okay, it is the leaves, and the leaves are basically high up. Right, so I'm going above the screen, right? So yahan tak, right? You get it, right? So let's say there is a giraffe of this particular height, and then there is a giraffe of this particular height. Who is going to have a little bit of advantage? Okay, the giraffe of this particular height is going to be able to eat the leaves here. At the same time, it can also eat the leaves here. Whereas the one that is slightly on the shorter end, okay, meaning the neck is not as tall, right? It is not as long, right? And that basically gets to eat only here, and you have a lot of competition with the other giraffes as well. So there is a little bit of an advantage, right? So you have a little bit of an advantage, if you have a longer sort of neck. So the environment essentially is that, in order to basically survive there, in order to be able to get your food, right? So you need to have, so let's say you change that particular environment and it goes a little higher, right? The leaves are basically higher and higher. It is going to be selecting in this particular manner. The longer ones are basically not exactly selected. You're basically going to see evolution of necks of the giraffes from being shorter to longer, right? So that is the next one. But primarily, in case you want to sort of explain this, you have to talk about use and disuse. So according to him, he makes this point that, and this is fair, right? So the more you use something, the stronger it gets, the more developed it gets, okay? And the less you use it, it becomes, almost degenerate, right? So if you don't use something, it is going to degenerate. If you use it a lot, it's going to become stronger, right? Is this true? The more you use something, the stronger it gets, the more it develops. The less you use it, okay, or disuse basically ensures that वो degenerate हो जाएगा, right? So that is basically something. In fact, I'll give you an example here. People who stay in the hills, right? So people who stay in the hills, those populations generally, if you see, unka calves are basically well developed, right? They don't generally have skinny calves. Calves, matlab ye, beneath your what do you call this, hamstring ke niche. The camera doesn't go. I'm sure that you guys know what is a calf, right? So us wala portion is basically, so why is that? When you walk up and down, essentially you'll see some sort of development, right? I had an injury in my knee, my ankle, right? So I had that entire cast, right? So once I had that particular cast, right? So that was for 3 months, 100 days, something it was, right? So when they removed it, I had not used it for so long, right? And then literally it was the size of my forearm. Okay, so I have this one, and then I was overusing the other left, right? So I had my left calf that was so well developed, right? Because I had to put all my force here. My entire body weight was basically being balanced because of this particular calf, and this one had not, had any sort of force. So that was the size of this. So eventually it took me a while to basically sort of balance both of them, right? So you understand where he's coming from and what is the kind of idea that he's trying to give. So the more and more sort of you use something, the more it sort of develops, okay? And with the internal urge and your the first and the second sort of ideas put together, right? So you will understand that there is going to be use of this and the lengthening of the neck. Okay, the second major idea in this particular this one is going to be inheritance of acquired characters. Now यहाँ पे थोड़ा सा you just try to pay attention here. Inheritance of acquired character, that basically means that in this particular generation, let us say that you have developed something, there is going to be inheritance of that particular trait in the next generation. Does that make sense? So let's say that, I develop my calf, okay? So that is something that I've acquired in this particular generation, okay? In the next generation, it is going to be inherited. So let's take two aspects here, two major ideas, right? So first one is use and disuse. Okay, so I guess I'll make this first. Use and disuse. Of course, the first to be had, okay? But these are the main. So the more you use, what happens? More it develops. Okay, remember my calf, okay? And disuse, remember my other calf, right? So this degenerates. This is according to him. Okay. Second major idea, and ये थोड़ा सा आपको सोचना पड़ेगा. It is inheritance of acquired characters. लिखूं क्या? Okay, I'll just write this. Inheritance inheritance of acquired characters or characteristics. Okay, so inheritance of acquired characteristics. So what this is doing is that यहाँ पे आपको two things you want to do. First thing is that you want to sort of color change कर लेते हैं. Okay, so focus here. You're acquiring a particular character. Okay, you're acquiring a particular character, and then this character is going to be inherited. Okay, now tell me, what is the character that you have acquired? Okay, so if there is a particular character that you have acquired, okay, this is going to be inherited in the next generation. So let's say there is a man, okay, or there is a woman, okay, she has acquired a new character, okay, and then this one, okay, so when she has kids, kids have inherited the acquired character. ठीक है? The kids have basically inherited this acquired character. You understand this? This part is kind of clear. So just be very, very aware of what we're talking about. So let us say that, you know, ये वाला आपने use किया. So this basically developed. This development, okay, this development becomes the acquired character, and this acquired character gets inherited. Is this clear? ये concept अभी clear है? Okay, so you're basically using something that develops further. Okay, whether it is your neck, you're becoming, you know, sort of like longer, okay, you know, and then eventually that becomes the longer neck, okay, the longer neck, okay. So let's say, you know, there's a giraffe that basically keeps like sort of like, you know, stretching its neck, okay, and let's assume that it is in the first wala diagram jahan pe the neck is relatively on the shorter end, right, and then it basically keeps sort of like stretching and stretching and stretching so that it can get access to more and more sort of leaves, and then it is able to get the food, and then it is able to survive. That eventually becomes this longer neck. So acquired character equals the longer neck. This is going to be inherited, okay, and then the kids, okay, are going to inherit this particular acquired character. ये flow समझ में आया आपको? Is this flow kind of clear? So he does not define exactly which acquired character. The acquired character that he's talking about is basically this. So in fact, if I want to use his terms, I'm going to put this in, in quotes. Okay, so we are basically taking his example. In fact, so if I have to basically talk about this, right, let's say ki, so initially let's say this is the neck. Okay, this is my giraffe. Okay, it looks a little more muscular. It has some patches. Okay, so this is the length of the neck. So this is the length of the neck. Okay, so what happens? This thing, these are the leaves. Okay, and it is basically trying to sort of keep stretching this again and again, and this essentially is gaining, let's say, 1 inch in this particular generation. Okay, that becomes the acquired character. Okay, increase in 1 inch. Eventually it is going to have offspring, right? Kids ne boling hum yahan pe will say offspring, but I've given you as kids, right? So yahan pe so the next, eventually basically what happens, the sort of a giraffe. Okay, what will be the difference here? The acquired character. Okay, right, this looks okay, this is what you have. Okay, and let's say it is again going to sort of keep stretching up and further. So the acquired character here again is going to be, let's say, an inch or a 2 inch, 3 inch, again many generations later, as long as it keeps giving out its what shall I say, as long as it keeps pursuing that, you know, the same thing, jahan pe it is stretching its neck in order to be able to get, you know, further and further up the freshest of leaves, maybe, let's say. Okay, it is going to eventually come to a point jahan pe it is going to look something like this, although the body ka size should not change, which I have changed it here. It's so well designed, symmetric, isn't it? Okay, so essentially what is happening here is that you are seeing that the more you use, okay, and you're using it here because you're stretching it in order to get to, the better sort of leaves, the fresher sort of leaves. Okay, yahan pe leaves have the least amount of competition, right? Okay, because these guys cannot reach. Okay, these guys cannot reach. So this one is always going to have food. If it always has food, it is going to basically reach all the way till adulthood, or at least till reproductive stage. If it reaches till reproductive stage, it is going to sort of like reproduce, pass on its, that acquired character is going to get sort of passed on to the subsequent its offspring, right? So you can actually see that this is basically increasing. So this is the main sort of idea here. But if I have to come here, you have to understand, what is essentially happened here. We are basically using something, and what is that use? What exactly is being done? It is a stretching of this neck more and more and more. According to, this is actually not correct. Okay, but this is basically the theory that was proposed by, your Lamarck, when this entire world was not ready to accept evolution. Okay, so he says that there is some sort of evolution that is taking place, but the idea was slightly wrong. Okay, but what was his idea is basically what we are discussing. The idea is that if you're using something, it tends to, depending upon what you do with it, right? So yahan pe it is stretching, so basically the acquired character is going to be that you're gaining. Okay, you're basically gaining height. That is the acquired character, the longer sort of neck. This acquired characteristic is going to be sort of inherited. So the next generation, and then inke kids ka kya hoga? This will probably get passed on. Oops. Okay, and not only will this get passed on, it also means that, in this generation, if they basically sort of pick up something else, okay, that becomes an acquired character that is going to be inherited, and so on and so forth. So definitely there is some sort of logical way in which he's pushing an idea, okay, evolution. But this is the mechanism of the evolution that he's speaking about. He also basically proposes you can apply this to many things, right? So what else can you apply this to? Say, for instance, right? So let us say, let's create another one. He talks about, the examples are basically given. Okay, so let's say these water birds. Okay, so water birds, give me some examples. Okay, there is a flamingo. Okay, those of you who have done your environment, right? So you must have come across many of these. Okay, herons. Okay, then you have your egrets. Okay, so these are basically water birds. If you've seen these water birds, you must have seen them, standing in shallow pools of water. Okay, and their legs will be like sticks, and they'll be like very long. Their bodies like slightly up, right? You must have seen these kind of birds, right? And then they'll have these large beaks, and just say, they literally pick up that the fish, and then they kind of swallow it. You must have seen this, right? National Geographic, Animal Planet, वगैरह देखोगे, so you will basically get that. Okay, so before we criticize him, let's see what exactly is. Like, first of all, we have to understand what is the mechanism that he's proposing. So let's say that I have a bird. Okay, so, and the bird, so these things basically have extremely long legs. Okay, so now you know exactly where I'm going with it. So the acquired character here is going to be this. So basically the acquired character here is going to be this long leg. So according to him, what will it be? So let's say that I have something like this. So this is my bird. Okay, so this has these long kind of legs. We call it chicken legs, right? So you have something like this, and let's say this is the pool of water, and its length is somewhere here, right? Doesn't look right. So now that's good. Okay, we'll give it an eye as well. Okay, so this is something here. Okay, so this is basically what you have here. You see this, but eventually what you're seeing is that if you have legs that are relatively on the shorter end, during high tide, what you have is that the body basically gets wet. Okay, it could happen. Or it also limits the ability for you to be able to go deeper into the water. So you have to basically stay shallow. Fish, seashore mein aayega? Nahi. But if you go a little further, it'll be there, right? So you have to understand that this also has more competition from the other ones who have basically shorter legs. So you have to basically go to those areas jahan pe it is a little depth hai. So what it does is that it is essentially trying, and you can't see my legs, but at least from the top, you should be able to tell what I'm doing. What am I doing? I'm basically trying to stretch my legs. Right from my ankle, I'm basically pushing through, okay, and I'm sort of trying to reach a little higher, okay, so that my body, let's say if I'm a bird, my body is basically a little not wet. This is something that you must have really done, right? So let's say that you have your trousers, okay, and if you've ever been to the beach, or if you've been to a lake or something, you don't want your trousers or your your pants basically to get wet. What do? You try to go as far as possible, okay, so that you don't get wet, and then you try to pull it a little further, and then you basically go in, right? So you do this, right? Exact same thing, this Mr. Bird is doing here, right? So this is basically trying to do this. So what it does is that it keeps like stretching and stretching and stretching. Okay, with more use, you have some development. What is the development? Yahan pe it is going to have longer legs, right? So this longer leg is basically going to be something like this. So let's say 1 centimeter or something, 1 inch has basically grown. So eventually, what you will see is it is basically everything else remains the same. Now, can you guys tell that there is definitely one difference? It has basically increased, and eventually it will come to a point jahan pe this particular bird, okay, has itne long legs, right? And that he's proposing as an explanation, okay, that he's basically proposing as an explanation, okay, to show his. Now, if you're a water bird, which one would you be? Which one would give you some sort of advantage? Okay, but the water bird basically looks something like this. Okay, this is what it is. So he's trying to provide an explanation for this in a scientific sort of manner based on his ideas, right? So the more you use something, the more you're going to sort of gain some sort of character. That acquired character basically gets, not only are you acquiring that character in that particular generation, you're also going to be passing on that acquired character to the next generation, okay, jahan pe they have not done anything for it. You get the picture, right? So this is basically what he's proposing. Now this seems like, okay, okay, I can understand, and it is a decent sort of theory and mechanism and all of that, but still we'll hate you because you've gone against the social and political and religious sort of establishment, right? So he was not very liked, okay, but his but the publish, it had gotten published. The idea basically got a lot of good press, bad press, whatever it is, right? So any press is good, right? If you're writing a book, especially a scientific book, so people speaking about it, general population speaking about it, is definitely a big deal. So this is basically what he's essentially proposing. So what he's proposing is that, okay, you are going to acquire a character by doing something. So for instance, let us say that, see, for instance, right? So if I'm a bowler, okay, or let's say I am a like a pitcher, like baseball mein agar bologe, right? So you basically have to sort of, fling the ball this way, right? So you're doing this and you're doing this, practicing it again and again and again and again. Then eventually you'll become a guy who basically has a much stronger sort of right arm than the left arm. Okay, that is possible, correct? That becomes the acquired character. Right? So anything that you use in a particular manner, okay, there is going to be some sort of acquired character there if there is any sort of change in the body. Right? So this is the main sort of idea that he's proposing: use and disuse, acquiring a character, and that character basically passing on to the subsequent sort of generations is basically what he proposes. Is the mechanism kind of clear? Now, is this true? Is this true? If I keep doing this, will I grow taller? If I keep reaching out for leaves like this, will my neck grow longer? Siberian crane, okay, good. Although Siberian crane, I think, is part of this family itself. I'm not sure. Okay. No, but we are not going to talk about, sickle cell anemia, because which year are we in? We are basically in 1809, right? So we don't know any of those, right? So we're not going to use any of these terms unless, we reach that particular phase. The next phase, we are going to sort of like come 50 years later. Okay. So we are going to reach Darwin, okay, 1859. Okay. So this is basically the main sort of idea. So this is the main sort of idea, right? So generally, let us say if you have to basically write it, if it's a long answer question, you can basically bring up all four of those kind of points. But even if it's a small question, just try to hit upon the point number 3 and point number 4, which is going to be the law of use and disuse, okay, and also the theory of inheritance of acquired characters. These two ke saath you have to construct. You sort of explain the explanations, explain the examples using the same two terms, use and disuse, right? Ye wala aapko you have to basically use this. Okay, where is that? Okay, you have to use all these keywords: use, disuse, okay, develops, okay, acquired character. That acquired character basically gets inherited. This is basically the simple sort of explanation for it. Okay, so this is basically what you have. So there's a giraffe again. Okay, and I was supposed to draw the egrets here. Okay, so I have basically drawn that in the green board, whatever, the my view wala, this thing, right? So this is a table that I will be giving you in your handout. Okay, but this part, yes, center wala part is something that I have left blank, and I want you to write this because I want you to sort of know exactly what each of these things is: internal urge, new needs from environment, use and disuse, and inheritance of acquired character. This one alone, you basically just note it down. So anytime I basically mark something in green, okay, what does it mean? Okay, this has to be noted down. Okay, so just note this part in your notebook. Okay, this will be something that you have to do. Use is stronger, no use is weaker, right? So you think of, anytime you think about use and disuse, you think of my not so symmetric calves, okay, during that phase of my life, right? Inheritance of acquired character, what does that mean? It is adapted traits passed to the offspring. Learn just write adapted. I think you'll have to explain a little bit if it is about this one. Now you guys are telling me that there are some criticisms, okay, some nahi, bahut sare hain. In fact, there were many scholars. Okay, there was a person named George Cuvier. Okay, George Cuvier, he was also a scientist, and he also wanted to sort of support evolution. But there are some holes in this particular story that he felt. See, for instance, right? So let us say that you have a bodybuilder's baby. You have, let's say, the mother. okay, and the father, dono are like really into gymming, okay, whether they are weightlifting, powerlifting, or let's say bodybuilding. Jahan pe bodybuilding is mainly about hypertrophy, right? So basically what they try to do is that they try to keep the workout in such a manner ki the idea is that it is like sort of like making the muscles bigger, to put it in simple terms, right? So that is basically what it is. So let's say you have a very strong muscular man, okay, and he marries another very strong big muscular sort of woman, okay. Now they have a child, right? What will the child be like? Father bodybuilder, mother bodybuilder, okay. The child will be something like this. True or false? The child is born like this, if not this much, itna vascularity nahi hai to bhi the child is something like this. True or false? It's an overwhelming false from all of you, but have you seen somebody who is big bodybuilder who married another bodybuilder woman, right? And then they have a baby. Were you there when the baby was born? Did you go and check out the baby in the hospital, right? Did it not look like this? So that essentially means something. That essentially means you're right, okay? So the point here is that not every acquired character gets inherited. Okay, just listen to me deeply, okay? Not every acquired character is going to be inherited in the next generation. Does that make sense? Valid point. ठीक है, the baby is not going to look like this. In fact, the baby is going to look like a normal baby, right? ठीक है, so that is essentially what it is, right? And कितना big है, कितना small है is actually a product of like how much, how well, the woman has been taken care of, and how well she has taken care of her body during the 9 months, right? So what was the nutrition like, and what is the kind of like, the macros कैसे हैं? Is it primarily carbs? Is it like, decent amount of proteins? All these kind of things, right? So it is that, okay? उतना ही difference होगा, but ऐसे तो नहीं होगा, right? So that basically means कि not every acquired character is going to be inherited. So meaning, so once you poke a hole in somebody's theory, then you can, so basically it gets disproved. Another thing is basically, let's say कि, somebody, and this is something somebody had mentioned, right? कि let's say कि you have an arm, okay, and unfortunately, in some sort of, or let's say somebody had an arm, okay, and at some particular point, because of some sort of an accident, they lose this particular arm working with a machine or something, right? So let's say they have a particular child, okay, and if that particular person, if that person basically has a child, will that person have babies that don't have konsa arm hai? Let's say it is basically the right arm. So if they don't have the right arm, so does that mean all the babies will be born without the right arm? Is it going to be something like this? Actually, it is not. Right? So this is, so not every acquired character. The acquired character is basically, so what is acquired character here, guys? Okay, the acquired character here is going to be, if I can just write it here. Let's just write it here. Okay, bodybuilder baby, यहाँ पे acquired character क्या है? What is acquired character? Okay, the acquired character is going to be muscles, right? You have to earn it. Okay, it is not going to be given. Okay, just like that, right? So arm cut off. So the acquired character is going to be here. What is it going to be? Loss of arm. Is that going to be inherited? It is not going to be inherited. The child can actually be born despite the father or mother ka accident in which they lose. Or let's say ki father, what if the father does not have an arm because of an accident and the mother does not have in an accident? मान लो कि same accident में both of them basically lost their right arm. What about the child? Okay, the child will still be born with both arms, right? So that is that. Another one is basically the cowboys. So the acquired character. So cowboys, you guys know, right? So generally they call ranch hands, especially in the West, right? So you have, a large number of cows that are going to be owned and operated by, let's say, these farmers. And especially in western part of your US, right? So वहाँ पे like Montana, Idaho, these kind of areas, what they do is that they spend most of their time basically on these horses, and because they spend most of their time on the horses for decades, they do it. Okay, just trying to sort of like keeping the flock together, the herd together, right? And then they take it out and then they bring it back in and all this, right? And a lot of the people who these cowboys basically have a particular kind of an issue जहाँ पे the legs become like this. इसको बोलते हैं कि bored legs, right? So this is my arms because you can't see my legs, right? So it becomes something like this. Okay, cowboy because of the cowboy hat. Can you see hat? Right, so cowboys. So essentially, they become like this after a period of time. But does that mean, because they have spent their life like this, okay, and they have acquired a particular character, and that acquired character is going to be bored legs, okay? If cowboys have kids, offspring, okay, will they be born like this? Okay, they will not be born like this. So what we do in our life, okay, it does not mean it is going to get passed on. Okay, so but this is 1809 in which he's proposing it, right? So 1809 maybe we can actually allow him a little bit of room. right? So today we are in 2000, like we have not seen that particular period, right? So wahan pe, they don't know what is cells, they don't know what is, matlab kuch nahi pata unko, right? So at that particular point, if he's mentioning that particular story, there were people who would accept that, right? But of course, over a period of time, you're starting to see criticisms. In fact, August Weismann, okay, so when he comes out with this kind of an experiment that he does, right? So this is in the, this is like 60 something years later, after he had proposed, 60, 70 years later. So what he did is that, he takes like this mice and then he's like, okay, let's get it to acquire a character. What is the what is acquired character here? So what he does is that he takes mice, okay, and then what he does is that each generation, whenever they have those offspring, he basically cuts off the tails, right? So and then he does this generation after generation after generation, bahut sare, they reproduce like anything, right? So and then he's essentially seeing what is going to happen if our good old Lamarck is right. That means that maybe let's say after a few generations, let's say they should be tailless, or it should be at least कि मतलब tail is becoming weaker, or it should be that the tail is becoming shorter. मतलब कुछ ना कुछ तो degeneration होना चाहिए, because each generation I'm basically giving them the same sort of acquired character of cutting off their tail, okay, loss of that particular tail. But then he found out that despite the fact that he would keep doing this, okay, to the new offspring, each generation all he had, okay, is just a lot of mice. Okay, a lot of tailless mice, but they were being born with, the tails as usual. So again, this basically goes on to disprove, that inheritance of acquired character wala. Like not all, acquired characters in this particular generation are going to be inherited in the next generation. But again, you have to understand, we are in 1809. Right, today you will say कि see हमारे different types of cells are there, somatic cells है, and there are your germ cells, yeah, your reproductive cells are there. So reproductive cells are the ones, but not at that particular time period. 1809, we don't know all of those, right? So 1809 में he was able to sort of come out with some sort of ideas. Of course, there are going to be some sort of knowledge gaps. Okay, so ये होंगे आपके limitations. Is this kind of clear? But the general kind of criticism that is actually provided is going to be the fact that, what we know today, a lot of it he was not able to explain. But a lot of those things are basically genetics, and this happened in the last 100 years. Some part, Mendel was basically, let's say, 150, 160 years. Okay, so, but that is still 60 years before him. Right, us samay he has basically given. So now if you basically say कि, he did not explain, which of them are genetic and which of them are basically due to environment, and DNA and gene के बारे में he did not explain, right? Of course, it was not there, right, at that particular time period. So this is a criticism, but it does not mean that it is. But you have to understand the context of this particular criticism. Okay. See, for instance, use and disuse. Okay, what about use and disuse? Everything you use becomes stronger, better. My calves did. Okay, my calves did. Anybody plays badminton here? Or do you know anybody who plays badminton? It's a very fast racket sport. Okay, and you basically have to lunge this way. You have to lunge this way. You basically have to go like this, right? To a great extent. You use your knees to a great extent. To all of you who've been playing badminton for quite some time, okay, how do your knees feel? Good? Ask any power lifter. How does your back feel? Especially the ones who are doing deadlift for a long duration. How does your back feel? Fencing, you play a lot, professional level. Oh, great. Okay, shoulders as well as knees. Right. Okay, your right arm is much stronger than your left arm because of TT. Okay, ठीक है. Judo too. Okay, basically you have just this one fact, like in school में, like when you were like kids, what do they say? Okay, don't use, don't keep watching something on your screen, and don't use it so much. Give it a little bit of a break. Why so? Okay, if you keep using it, it should be like stronger and stronger, right? Okay, but the ones who basically spend a lot of time, I don't know if it's really even proven. Okay, because I did watch, screen, मेरा तो था, right? But my father, he has specs. My mother, she has specs reading के लिए. Okay, and then my sister, थोड़ा सा, I mean, she has, I guess. उतना नहीं है, but मतलब तीनों का, like at particular point they have to use it. My father basically has to use it at all times, right? ठीक है, so that is that, and I'm the only one who basically does not have to use specs, right? So what about you? They basically say this, right? So if you keep looking at screen to a great extent, it is going to sort of that one. Okay, And then disuse के लिए I've basically given you a couple of examples. You can just go through it as well. See, for instance, the wisdom teeth, right? So wisdom teeth is basically your last molar, right? So how many of you guys have it, right? In case you are 25 plus, on average at 25, it basically erupts in most, right? So after 25, people generally tend to have wisdom teeth, right? So मेरा तो नहीं है, okay? My sister had it, okay, but she had to remove it, when she was in her early 20s, right? So all of these kind of things. So in case you're not using it, okay, agar we are not going to be eating the kind of foods, the tough, difficult sort of foods of like roots and tubers and nuts and seeds, all these kind of things, then it should basically degenerate, and we should not have that. Agar space nahi hai hamare jaw mein, then why does it still basically grow, right? So you get the picture, right? Okay, appendix ka this thing kya hai, right? The only thing that I know about the appendix is basically that it is giving us one extra surgery, right? If anybody has had appendicitis, you would know, right? So there are some criticisms, right? ये वाला criticism is an important criticism. You want to write it, but इसका आपको context देना है the fact that it is 1809, okay, जहाँ पे we don't have those kind of scientific advances, right? So this has to be contextualized, right? So this is basically the idea, okay? So in case you want to basically explain Lamarckism, now you might have good examples to basically explain, right? So let's say you're explaining it to, let's say, today your uncle, your cousin, your brother, your sister, your friend, right? So वहाँ पे you can apply that in any way in which you want, right? So acquired character could be so and so and all of that. But जब आप exam में लिख रहे हो ना, you want to hit the example that Lamarck had used. Okay, the second they see the giraffe, okay, and even if the giraffe looks like the giraffe that I drew, okay, exactly like parallel necks and all of that, does not matter, okay? Okay, it does not matter. So far as it's the giraffe that you've shown, and then you've shown that it is an acquired character that basically gets inherited, right? You are going to, मतलब वो read भी नहीं करेंगे. They know exactly where you're going with it. Okay, but if you're going to bring in something, let's say about bunnies, okay, rabbits, okay, you have a great example. Okay, you have to ensure that आप explain कर रहे हो, you have to use more words, ensure that there are no sort of faults in your story. ये सब आपको करना है. So my suggestion, just write the giraffes, okay, and you can bring in the egrets. Is that clear? Criticism, just try to see to it, depending upon the need of the question. If it's a short answer question, you cannot, fit in 40% of your answer as criticism, right? It is a discredited theory, okay, because he did not basically provide the right explanation or the right reasons for, for evolution. But does not matter. You have to understand 1809. This is the best theory that we could basically come out with, right? So itna discredit mat karo. Still say that it set the ball rolling. From now on, it is game on, right? Now, if anybody has a better theory, okay, find faults in my this thing. This is the scientific method, right? So you have to sort of take my hypothesis and try to see if, you have some sort of evidence using some sort of field work, some sort of study, and then you try to disprove me and then show me a better sort of mechanism, okay, a better sort of alternative. And then somebody else will basically do this to this particular person. That is how we contribute to science. So nothing wrong in it. You got it, right? So agar chota sa question hai, lesser number of this thing, you cannot fit everything in, right? But if you have room for everything, basically something like this. Again, if it's short question, you focus more on, law of use and disuse and inheritance of acquired characteristics. Okay? The most important person in your anthropology is basically whom we are going to talk about now. Okay? The most important person is your Sir Charles Darwin. Okay? See, Charles Darwin, see this entire, okay, I'll basically start with his life history. Okay? And it has something to do with South America, especially an island that is a little far off from South America. Okay, maybe 600 miles or something off the coast of your western side of your South America. And we'll basically come here and talk about like how we reach here. See, Charles Darwin comes from, he was born somewhere in 1800s. Early 1800s, right? So just around the time when Lamarck was coming out with his idea, right? So this is where Charles Darwin was born. Charles Darwin was actually born in, in Great Britain, right? And his family was one of the richest families outside of London. Okay, his father was a practicing medical doctor. Okay, and unka like business tha, ye tha, wo tha. It's basically one of the known families of England at that particular time. Okay, of Great Britain at that particular time. Now the thing is, just like in Indian middle class, we basically have this kind of option, jahan pe beta whatever you want to do, kar lo, kuch bhi pad lo, right? But degree to it has to be in engineering, it has to be in medicine, and then it has to be what are the other options that you guys get these days? Mere time mein to it used to be CA. Right, so one of these kind of options is basically what you can do, and iske alawa baki sab aap dekho mat, right? So this is something that we will have. Similarly, in the 1800s in Great Britain, right, there were only a few professions that a person can take up, right? So this guy was a a talented kid, okay, from a very known kind of family, so matlab, you have to take up certain kind of professions, and those 3 professions at that particular time were, okay, one thing is you can be a medical doctor, second thing is that you can be like a military officer, or, admin officer, one of those kind of things. Yeah, you can take up another respectable position, that is going to be like a Anglican parson, right? Like a bishop, yeah, a deacon, a church ka father, right? One of those kind of things. So these are the options that Charles Darwin basically had. Talented kid he was, right? So he goes and basically joins his father basically pays for his medical degree, in Edinburgh, it used to be one of the best colleges at that particular point, right? In fact, one of his brothers was also studying in that particular university. Now, he was a little bit of a troublemaker. He was knowledgeable, he was talented, okay, he had academic interest, but his interest was not in medicine. Right now, there will be some of you who are doctors, right? You might think that the greatest scientific mind of the 19th century he had to drop out from medical science, right? So why would that have been? Actually, he was kind of intellectual, and he would apply himself, but only if it interested him. Beg your pardon? Only if it interested him. And medicine at that particular point, okay, was a very difficult profession, primarily from practicing point of view. Okay, now think about this. We're talking about the 1820s and 1830s, jahan pe you don't have, even anesthesia has not been found. So, matlab, in case you have to, if you want to be a medical doctor, you have to be okay seeing somebody scream, okay, while you're doing surgery into some body part. Okay, and you have to, this is a very difficult phase, right? So it's a very difficult sort of thing, and then he just did not have that heart to be able to handle that, and then he disappoints his father by dropping out from medical college, right? So medical college ke baad, basically what happens, then he's basically given an option, right? So you have the other 2 things. Military mein jao, yeah, become a bishop, a deacon, a church ka father. Okay, I will basically get you into another place jahan pe you take up this particular profession. So he goes to become a deacon, Anglican parson, like, a church ka father. So basically he goes to get a degree at Cambridge University, this time, after having disappointed his father, and basically takes up another thing. Yahan pe once he comes in, right, and it's so interesting because he is basically learning, to become a religious specialist at the same time, that which is like creationism and all of that, right? So at that particular point, so it is blasphemy. He's supposed to be on this side, but then he basically comes out and gives the greatest counterpoint, which is evolution, right? So in fact, in the very first slide that I had shown you, you have pre-Darwin, Darwin, post-Darwin, right? So very, very interesting, what happened in his life. So he basically goes to pursue, a Bachelor of Arts ka degree and Bachelor of Arts honors, something along those lines. He's not eligible, academic grades are not that great, so Bachelor of Arts bana dete hain, and then he basically pursues this. While he's pursuing this, he basically gets interested, in another, friend, yeah, cousin of his, okay, second cousin, somebody was there. He's like, hey dude, I have a butterfly collection. So he goes and he's like, oh my god, you have all of these kind of butterflies, this is so interesting, the natural world is like so great. Then he becomes like, mujhe bhi ye karna hai. Okay, so entomology, right? So that is basically study of insects and all this. So he decided that I'll basically study beetles, I will collect beetles. So his father basically sends him to medical college, and then after that he sends him to a university to basically get a Bachelor of Arts and become this one, and he's basically going around skipping classes and going and trying to find beetles that he can collect. And he did, and in fact, like when he sort of like finds something that he's interested in, he's able to put in his entire mind, this thing on it. So while he was still in university, his beetle collection was basically published in the British Journal for, Anthropology, something along those lines. So I don't remember the exact name of that particular journal while he was in university. So that is kind of great. Okay, father not too impressed, right? Ye to hota hai, right, in everything, but eventually, I'm sure that by the time it is 1859, his father and everybody else is like extremely impressed, right? So he's made one of the greatest sort of discoveries of the 19th century, or the greatest sort of ideas of the 19th century. Graduation ho gaya. Okay, he's ranked number 10 amongst 170 something students, right? So he's done really well. Okay, now he would have to basically take up the role of some religious specialist in some this thing, but then he gets an opportunity, because of the kind of experience that he has in collecting different sort of insects and all of this. So there is an expedition that is going on. Okay, it is basically going to leave from England, and then it is going to go different parts of the earth, right? So basically it is a naval sort of expedition, and it is going to leave from, let's say, London is somewhere here, England is somewhere here, and it is basically going to come here, and then it's going to go here. Basically it is trying to map the earth, okay, and the landforms on the earth. So it is going to be here. So he basically comes to his father. He's like, Dad, I have to go on a trip, okay, and it's a long trip. Will you be able to, shall I go? So his father is like, what trip? Okay, are you not reporting to duty? So he's like, just for some time. So kitna time? So he said, actually it was meant to be 3 years, but eventually it became 5 years. 5 years after his graduation, he is basically on a ship, a tiny ship, and the name of that ship is HMS Beagle, right? So very, very iconic name, okay, of that particular ship that sailed from England and then went different parts, and especially South America and then the Galapagos Islands, right? So I told you, right? So some islands here are basically important in this. Okay, 1.5 years he was basically on different parts like South America, these islands and so on. But 3.5 years was basically just, it went in travel. Right, so he basically went and traveled. He didn't even get paid for those 5 years. Imagine going to your parents and saying that graduation ho gaya, 5 saal ke liye, no pay. Okay, kind of like UPSC, right? Okay, but you know, for him, he had to leave, and there is no guarantee that he'll be back, and you know, it's a risky thing, right? But he basically went and suna nahi, and then he went and he basically pursued this. So this is one of the most interesting kind of stories. Okay, and he goes on to sort of become an iconic figure in science because of primarily this particular thing that has happened, which is essentially that, you know, when he was here, so for instance from here, okay, so from here, so they were basically just going through this, and then they went to Galapagos Islands, and here again he's basically collecting, this time not beetles, but he's basically collecting different parts of, you know, animals and you know, some parts of birds, and trying to sort of put them together and trying to understand why are there some differences, what could it be, okay, and then he's trying to sort of connect this to evolution, and he's going to come out and explain, okay, something about evolution that, you know, will basically sort of address some of the issues that were there in the Pehla wala theory that we have basically studied, that is your Lamarck's theory. Is that clear? So essentially what he did is that he came here and then realized that, you know, there is one particular kind of a bird, okay, and different sort of islands, and those islands look different. Let's say one is like fertile island, one is plains, one is hills, one is dry, one is rocky, one is so and so. So the different kind of islands mean different kind of environments are there. Okay, the different kinds of foods are there. So one particular similar kind of species, okay, but it has become like kind of different and different kind of species over time. So he proposes, and then he realizes that यहाँ पे evolution हुआ है. Okay, and then he is going to propose the most important theory. मतलब आपके paper में ये जाएगा for sure. Sometimes it could be a paragraph, sometimes it could be an answer, it could be a long answer, it could be a very long answer, but ये तो होगा. Okay, Darwin's ideas are something that you will be incorporating in your answer. Now let's take a look at Darwin's answer. His ideas. Okay, Darwin's ideas are basically this 5. Okay, so basically these 5 principles. Okay, the name of the book. So just to remember the name of the book, right? So I will just tell you. ये ऐसे note कर लो आप. I tend to ontos. The reason is, you know, sometimes you end up forgetting, is it on the origin of species, is it off the origin of species, is it the origin of species, right? So ऐसे याद रख लो, this is basically your cue. Okay, so on the origin of species, 1859, definitely something that you have to quote in your answers. Okay, यहाँ पे we'll just read through this, and then I'll basically go into each of these things. Organisms produce more offspring than they can that can possibly survive. Okay, organisms face a constant struggle to survive, and then you have there is variation in species. Different organisms within that particular species में थोड़ा सा variation is there, and then organisms best suited their environment survive, and then eventually they will, you know, मतलब natural selection का एक last वाला point है. I'll basically come here and explain this in simple terms. ठीक है? Okay, so first is overpopulation. ठीक है? Second essentially is going to be that there is a struggle. Life is a struggle, isn't it? Struggle for existence. Let me put it this way. Struggle for existence. Okay, तीसरा वाला. Okay. See the you know, different material में you will basically see this explanation done slightly differently, but you remember it in this particular manner. ठीक है? Variation. Okay, and then there is survival of the fittest. I'm sure that you must have heard this. Okay, and then there is natural selection. Okay, but either way, मतलब ये 5, you know, you should basically talk about this. So what do I mean by this? See, overpopulation and struggle for existence, right? So first thing, let's talk about this overpopulation, yeah, overproduction, right? So what exactly is being produced here? So first thing is, generally, you know, many different kind of organisms basically lay out many offspring, many possible offspring. अगर आप frogs को देखोगे, right? So basically they are, you know, they lay so many of those eggs, you know, and then मतलब उनका, you know that the phases that they go through, right? A tadpole wala phase, and then, you know, they become the frog wala thing. Or if you take the example of fish, if you take a look at fish, you will see that the fish, you know, when you know, if you see a jackfruit, right? So jackfruit, एक fruit में कितने seeds are there, right? You guys know jackfruit? Okay, I'm sure that you guys dekha to hoga, right? So you basically see ki there are so many of those things. So generally then the next generation you should see a lot more sort of fish, a lot more sort of frogs. What exactly happens? But generally you will notice that for some reason this overproduction of offspring does not necessarily result in overpopulation of that particular species. Next generation, somehow they are sort of like checked. थोड़ा सा वो control हो जाता है, right? Because of certain reasons, because there is a struggle for existence, right? Just because you have 50,000 children, okay, मान लो, okay. See, is it easy to have one child or is it easy to have 10 children? इस जमाने में I think 10 children is like extremely difficult. Okay, unless you are, there is a lot of ancestral wealth and you're free from tension and stress. Okay, and you have all the time in the world. 10 kids are basically going to be very, very difficult. I don't know how they did it like 2 generations ago, 3 generations ago, pre-independence wala phase mein, or maybe like the generation even just after that. They had a lot of these kids, right? Very, very difficult. Okay, salute to them how they basically raised all the kids. But you understand now there is going to be a struggle for existence for 50,000 eggs, right? They are not going to be able to survive, and it is because of multiple things. Okay, there is struggle with different sort of species, right? So for instance, let's say there is this particular fish and then there is another sort of fish, okay, and they basically have unka like food basically overlaps. There is some commonality. You have to basically compete with somebody else to get that particular food. Okay, that is one thing. Okay, so not everybody is going to have access to food, right? So some will basically, the weaker ones are basically going to die out. The ones who are able to get that particular food either by strength or either by luck, whatever it is, they are going to be able to survive and they are going to be there. So you get the picture, right? So there are a good chunk of them are going to basically be eliminated. Okay, there is competition within the species as well, right? So for instance, that 50,000 eggs, if they hatch, okay, they itself will compete amongst themselves for food and other kind of resources, right? Whether there is a shelter, the place to hide from other species, all these kind of things are also going to be difficult. So there is going to be competition in that particular realm as well. Teesra wala is basically, there is going to be competition because the environment ka carrying capacity is not going to be sufficient. For instance, agar humans ka bataun, okay, if you have 10 kids, na, matlab 10 kids ko rakhne ke liye we need a home. It's very, very difficult. Similarly, if it's 50,000 fish, right? So 50,000 fish, it's very, very difficult, right? So you cannot have that many. So you basically have different kinds of struggle. Okay, don't worry about it. But just because I'm explaining this, I'm telling you there is interspecies struggle, intraspecies struggle. Okay, there is struggle against environment. If everybody has 10 children, okay, so we are, 7 billion population, 8 billion population, what is Earth ka population? And then, if we're having 10 kids, okay, so that basically means ki maan lo ki 2 people from the previous generation are gone, you still have 8, more in the next generation. So 8 becomes like, samajh rahe ho, right? Like 50, 60 billion, right? Will the Earth basically be able to handle that kind of population? Will it be able to grow, food on Earth? Okay, or we'll have to colonize some other place and then sort of start creating these foods, right? It is going to be very, very difficult. So you understand. So you have this kind of struggle. So because of this particular kind of struggle, there is going to be this overproduction is going to be checked. Okay, not everybody is going to make it. Actually, this idea comes from Malthus. Okay, so this is Malthusian principles. Abhi nahi bataunga. I'll basically tell you about Malthus a little later, in another topic. Okay, this is Malthus. Okay. Okay, we could actually produce, okay, population, it basically grows fast, okay, but there would be sort of it will be checked, okay, because of certain things, it could be wars, it could be famine, it could be whatever it is, right? So these kind of things, the population doesn't necessarily happen like this. Okay, so ye ho raha hai. So I said ki some of them are going to be able to survive and some of them are basically not going to be able to survive. Is that clear? Okay, so some will survive and some will not survive, right? But how do you know ki who will survive and who will not survive? Is there a principle that we can basically talk about? So yahan pe we're going to take a look at the next 3. Okay, so you have variation within a species, survival of the fittest, and then there is nature selecting for some. Okay, the first 2 are clear. Can you guys just confirm that the first 2 are clear? Overpopulation, yes, you have how many, like 5 lakh people who are writing the exam. Okay, only 1% is basically going to get through your prelims and then basically the next round and so on. So definitely you will see that there is a struggle in that competition, right? You have this. Now you have it with, let's say, people of, ye kaise dekh sakte ho? Okay, you have to compete with people of your own state. You have to basically compete with your juniors. You have to compete with your seniors. You have to compete, you get the picture, right? So you have all of these kind of things. And so eventually it is going to be only, 1% who's going to make it, right? So ye to hoga, right? So that is basically, so I guess I understand your point. Now let's talk about this, right? So now let's say that, you know, not everybody is going to be able to survive. Who will survive? Uska principles behind this we'll have to basically see. So he is explaining this in terms of three aspects. Okay, so on to 1859. Okay, this is Darwin's original ideas. Okay, so he basically says there is variation. So there is going to be different kind of variations. So let's say that we have a particular species. Today we have, you know, all of us in this particular human species, right? So let's say that, you know, what is the variation here? So even though we are all part of, like, say, even though we are all, you know, from one country itself, there is a lot of dissimilarities, right? So if you take a look at hair, okay, we don't all have the same kind of hair, correct? Okay, how would you classify my hair? Okay, is it curly? Is it straight? Is it wavy? Okay, then you have skin tone, right? So skin tone, you can basically have, you know, any shade of brown, right? So if we all basically take a look at our skin tone, we'll actually see कि मतलब बहुत सारे वेरिएशन होंगे, right? You know, मतलब entire spectrum will be there. You know, people, some of you might be like relatively on the lighter end of that particular scale. Some of us will actually be on the what do you call that? You know, the darker end of that particular shade, right? Now, who's the fittest here? So again, so variation to hai, right? So you understand, right? So different kind of hair, different kind of this one, different kind of eyesight, different kind of abilities, right? You know, some of us are fast, some of us are slow, some of us are, you know, tall, some of us are short, some of us are strong, some of us are weak. Okay, some of us, you know, variation to hai. Okay, and this is there in all kinds of species, right? So ye to hoga. Right, so within that particular species, you will have different sort of offspring, okay, and each of them basically have some variation to hoga unme. Now, that variation is important for a particular reason, because some variations will actually be what we call as the fittest. Okay, fittest. Now, can somebody define what is fittest? Fittest actually means, okay, neither the strongest, okay, nor the fastest, nor the most aggressive. It means best adapted to that particular environment. Does that mean? So you guys know what I mean? Okay, so best basically means, fittest basically means that it is adapted to that particular environment. You are fit in that particular environment. So let's say the darker skin tone is basically fit. Okay, it is the fittest. It is going to be a big advantage in which kind of environment? It is going to be in that kind of environment, jahan pe the latitude, lower latitudes, okay, closer to the equator, the tropics, right? So subtropics. So this particular area, you are going to have an advantage, especially jahan pe, you know, we don't live under a roof, right? And you have to be outside, you know, you have to sort of you know, be in that kind of life jahan pe, you know, you have to go out and hunt your own food and grow your own kind of food, and you know, you don't have your you know, your SPF, you know, you have these numbers, right? You know, sunscreen and all these kind of things nahi hai tab, right? So the ones who basically have a darker sort of skin tone will be able to sort of survive here, okay? And the ones who are basically in the higher latitudes, unke liye this will prevent vitamin D ka synthesis, okay? We'll come into that in a little bit, but you understand now. So basically fittest essentially means that, you know, you are good for that particular environment. So in this variation, there will be some who are fit for that particular environment, some, okay, variations may not be ideal for that particular environment. So who will survive? The ones who survive are basically the ones that are best suited to that environment. That wala is, it's very important, okay? For environment one, this could be this guy, okay, another sort of variation might be removed in this particular population, but might be fit in another kind of an environment. Does that make sense? Okay, so that is that. So eventually what happens is that nature is going to select for those variation. What do we mean by nature selecting? See, nature basically selecting does not mean you know, it is nature selecting essentially means the survival of the fittest. Mein, who is the fittest? The fittest is the one that basically is adapted to that particular environment. Okay, and yahan pe if somebody is surviving, what does that mean? They are surviving long enough to reproduce and pass on their traits. Do not say genes, okay? Traits ही लिखना है, because we are still in 1859. Correct? Can you live long enough, you know, that you reach that adolescent stage, the puberty wala stage, jahan pe you reach the reproductive wala stage, and once the reproductive wala stage has arrived, then, you know, you probably are able to sort of attract mates, and then you are able to sort of reproduce and pass on that traits to the next sort of generation. Whereas somebody who is not able to survive, they will probably survive for a certain period, but, you know, at one particular point, they might sort of like, you know, not be able to sort of handle, and then wo mar jayenge, right? So that kind of population. So they have actually not reached your reproductive age, and they have basically not been able to pass on the traits to the next generation. So this keeps happening more and more. So this kind of population, this kind of variants would basically get eliminated from the population, and these kind of variations that basically are able to survive till reproductive age are able to sort of pass on their traits. So ऐसे generation after generation after generation अगर आप देखोगे what happens, so certain kind of traits, okay, the fittest sort of traits, okay, fittest for that particular environment, okay, so those kind of traits are going to be seen, okay, more and more in subsequent generations, in subsequent sort of generations, right? So that is basically called nature selecting for those traits. So this is your process of natural selection. Is this kind of clear? So generally you want to remember that the 5 principles के साथ आप लिखोगे ना, so your answer will be better. Is this the only way to sort of explain? नहीं, but through the principles itself you can basically explain. Whenever you want to see ना कि to explain, Darwin, evolution, natural selection, you can always go for this particular principle. It's a very logical kind of thing, right? So what do you have here? You have overpopulation. Generally, not everybody is going to be able to survive. Okay, that is, and why so? Why not everybody is going to be able to survive? Everybody is not going to be able to survive because your production itna hai, okay, and the means of survival, okay, but these are all limited, right? So there is going to be a struggle for that existence, and many of these overproduced beings are going to sort of not make it, right? And who are going to survive and who are not going to survive is going to be decided by VSN, okay, V for variation, S for survival of the fittest, and N for natural selection. Vasan, ऐसे याद रख लो, ठीक है? And then variation essentially means that there are different kind of variants within that particular 50,000 है, तो eggs है, yeah, whatever it is, right? So there are multiple of them within that particular species, and each of them basically have some kind of variants. Some of these variants are going to be fit for that particular environment, and some of those variants are not going to be fit for that particular environment. The ones who are fit in that particular environment, aka, okay, they are best suited for that particular environment, right? So they are the fittest ones. Those ones are going to be able to survive. Survive for how long? Survive long enough that they are able to reach reproductive age and attract mates and be able to pass on their traits. इसके बाद वो मर जाएंगे ना, तो it doesn't matter because they've already passed on their traits. So next generation will still have a lot of these kind of traits. But the ones that were not fittest for that particular environment, okay, they may have lived maybe for 10 days, 20 days, 5 years, whatever it is, but they have not been able to reach reproductive age as often as these variants have, the ones that we are calling fit. So इनका क्या हो रहा है? They're not able to sort of reach the reproductive age and be able to pass on their traits to the next generation. So in the subsequent generations, the proportion of certain kind of variants are going to increase. The fittest ones are going to basically increase to a great extent, and the ones that are not fit enough because they're not able to live long enough to be able to reproduce, इनके traits का proportion is basically going to reduce to a great extent. And eventually, over a period of time, you will have some kind of variants, okay, will be in that particular population, and some variants, especially that those are like not fit for that particular environment, will slowly get removed completely. Does that make sense? So overpopulation, okay, struggle for existence, different kinds of struggles for existence, variation, survival of the fittest, natural selection. Just try to think on this. Okay, what are the 5 principles? अगर ये 5 principles आपको याद है ना, any day you can write an answer on natural selection. Any day. You can create your own sort of examples also, but you will be able to sort of explain this. Overpopulation, struggle for existence. Now, why do you not want to start only from here? You do not want to start from here because you want to say that some variations are going to survive and some variations are not going to be able to make it. Why so? Because of this overpopulation, then there is a struggle. Not everybody is going to make it. Who is going to make it? Okay, variation. Okay, survival of fittest. Fittest is not the biggest, the baddest, the most aggressive, right? Aisa nahi hai, right? It is basically what? Fit for that particular environment. Okay, and that particular environment basically means how do you survive? Survival essentially means that you're going to be able to live long enough to be able to reproduce and pass on those traits to the next generation, whereas some other kind of variants are not going to be able to live long enough till they reach that reproductive age. So the next generation may those traits ka proportion is going to decrease. So eventually you will say nature has selected for dark skin. You will say nature has selected for light skin. You would say nature has selected for long legs, bigger body, right? So whatever it is, right? So it is basically going to be nature selecting for those traits. Did nature select? Okay. Yes, it has basically played a role in this way. Is this clear? This is the best way. This is the best logical way to sort of explain this. Just write down. Natural selection is the process by which individuals with heritable traits better adapted to their environment, survive and reproduce successfully, more successfully, survive and reproduce more successfully, leading to a gradual evolutionary change, leading to a gradual evolutionary change, leading to a gradual evolutionary change in populations over generations, leading to a gradual evolutionary change in populations over generations. Okay, leading to a gradual evolutionary change in populations over generations. So I'll repeat it. Okay, just give me a second. So the reason I'm telling you this is that, natural selection, whatever we just talked about is the whole idea of natural selection. So he says evolution happens by natural selection. Natural selection मतलब आपके पेपर में होगा ही होगा. Right? You cannot write a paper 1 of anthropology without somehow, factoring this in. मतलब कहीं ना कहीं तो ये है. But we may not know whether you have to write a long answer on it, a short answer on it. Sometimes it could just be like one sentence. So this is that one sentence. Okay, so natural selection, I'll just repeat this. Natural selection is a process by which individuals with heritable traits, better adapted to their environment, survive and reproduce more successfully, leading to a gradual evolutionary change in populations over generations. ठीक है, इसको एक बॉक्स में बना के इन योर कलर कोड, व्हाटएवर कलर कोड दैट यू हैव मेड ना, उसको मतलब यू हैव टू बी यूनिफॉर्म विद दैट कलर कोड. ठीक है, डिपेंडिंग अपॉन योर कलर एंड सो ऑन. ठीक है, व्हाटएवर यू हैव बेसिकली चोजन टू गो विथ. तो ऐड दिस आल्सो. लेट्स से आई गेट अ टैटू. आई डोंट हैव अ टैटू. Okay, but let's say I have a tattoo, right? Is that going to be a trait that is inherited? It is an acquired trait, right? Is that going to be inherited? It is not going to be. My handwriting, will that be inherited? No, it depends on the offspring, right? And how much effort that they put in, okay? And whether they are writing in that 4-ruled lined book and practicing their cursive, practicing their all that kind of thing, right? Is that heritable? But let's say it is skin color, skin tone. If it is height, if it is hair form, hair type, right? Okay, so these can, in fact, like I am lactose intolerant, right? Lactose intolerant basically means that you have trouble digesting milk, right? Now there is a good possibility, okay, that this could be in one of the offspring, right? There is a possibility, we can say. There are many genetic diseases, right? Facial features, right? So you understand, right? Heritable traits, okay, and which are not going to be. If I get a scar because of an accident, will that be passed on? It is not going to be passed on. Muscles that we talked about, is that going to be passed on? It is not going to be passed on. You can write it in your notebook, okay, but then later thoda sa nicely put it into your handout jahan pe you want to. On the sides I've basically provided you a lot of space, okay. If I basically take a look at the copies of some of my students who are क्लास ही नहीं, मतलब एक मेंस में दे टॉपर लबासना पहुंच चुके हैं, राइट? उनके पूरा लेफ्ट साइड राइट साइड में कुछ गैप ही नहीं होता है, बिकॉज व्हाटएवर आई से दे विल बी नोटिंग इट डाउन. In fact, I've seen students, in case I pause and say ahem, okay, उसको भी वो लिख लेते हैं. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but it is like literally everything that I say, their head will be like facing down, and then they'll be like copiously taking these kind of notes, right? So उतना नहीं करना है, but whatever I say, you basically just note it down. Okay, about Darwin. So let's get to Darwin. So basically, Darwin, what he says is that so I have this particular island here. So if I can just take this. So what continent is this? So can I say this is my okay, this is my South America, and from South America, let's say ki, around 600 miles west, I basically have a bunch of these kind of islands. Okay, and these islands are slightly different. So what he noticed, and the reason and the way in which he has basically come out with this entire sort of idea is that, let's say that in this particular island he saw a particular bird, okay, and that bird is basically a finch. Okay, so he's like, okay, so such a bird basically lives in this, okay, South America. So fascinating, you have so much diversity, and Amazon and all that, you have that, right? It is like so great. Hey, similar kind of bird here, 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 similar kind of bird here. So this is like some kind of finch, okay, but it is like it is different enough, okay, that it is a different species of its own. Okay, but it has like some commonality. So मतलब मुझे लग रहा है कि ये एक ancestral bird होगा. Okay, and that must have been somewhere here, and it must have migrated to one of these islands. Okay, and depending upon the kind of islands, you will basically have some sort of natural selection that is taking place, which basically means what? So there is within this that ancestral species, right? There must have been some kind of variants. So we'll take one particular kind of a trait, and then we'll basically discuss, and that particular trait is going to be Darwin's finches के beaks. Okay, so there must have been different kind of beaks. Okay, उतना difference नहीं हुआ होगा, but definitely you'll have some beaks. There are some beaks that look something like this, right? What is this hook shape? This must have been the ancestral kind of beak. Okay, so they must be eating seeds, right? So यहाँ पे you have something that is a lot thinner, narrower, right? So this is nectar. Okay, यहाँ पे this is like leaves, right? So you have different kind of environments and different kind of birds. Yeah, मतलब I have not drawn all of them, ठीक है? But you get the idea, right? So you basically get this idea. So what essentially has happened is that this particular species, let's say that it has actually gone to, let's say it's basically gone to either this island or this particular island, right? So, in this particular island, let's say that it has gone. So I'll go to the next slide. Okay. So let's say that it has to be, so let's say that, in this particular island, this is the food. Okay. And this is my rendition of flower. Okay. And yahan pe you have access to nectar. Okay, if it is nectar, tell me which is basically be the best suited here. Yahan se, is it this, is it this, is it this, is it this? Like which one of these things would be best if it is like, the food is basically like that? It is obviously going to be this one. So I'm going to just call it like, let's say thin and narrow, okay, thin, yeah, matlab slender or okay, something like this. Okay, I'll use a slender because I want to use another one, but there would have been some variants, right? So let's say there are some that are slender. What if it is like thick? Okay, thick. Oh, sorry, thick. Yeah, there you go. Okay, you have thick ones also, right? So you have some beaks, some variants that have beaks that are thin, okay, or slender, and there are some variants of that particular species that they have thick beaks. So who would be the fittest? So if I say this is my environment one, okay, in this particular island, okay, so who would it be? Now assuming that in the beginning you would have actually seen that you have let me call it the proportion must have been equal. Let's just say it is something like this. Okay, so maybe 3. Okay, and yahan pe you have thick ones, and you have thick ones, and you have thick ones, right? So this must have been the population that basically landed here. Okay, and eventually what will happen? These guys will basically be able to reproduce. Okay, so yeah, kya hoga? So let's say SS. Okay, maybe this one has 3 kids. Yahan pe 2 of them are not able to survive because they don't know how to basically get food from here. Okay, how do I basically use my thick, big beak in order to be able to suck it out here? I'm not even able to get it. So a couple of them might have been able to not survive. Okay, and this must have basically provided this might have survived somehow. Okay, मान लो कि it really fought hard enough and been able to survive. So ऐसा हुआ. Now इसमें से maybe one basically is able to survive and the other basically passes away, right? यहाँ पे these guys are just enjoying it, okay, because they have these slender beaks that is easily able to sort of like get the nectar and not be यहाँ से कोई competition भी नहीं आ रहा है. So eventually you will start seeing that the population has a lot of this kind of beaks. Okay, a lot of this kind of beaks, and then eventually you have just like very little, if maybe even it is not there at all. So from here, this is not an abrupt sort of change. It could be thousands of generations. Okay, at least hundreds of generations. Eventually, from this generation to this generation, can we say that the population has evolved? It has evolved because the beaks have evolved. Right? So again, let's talk about this. Okay, there is going to be overpopulation. Not everybody is going to be able to survive. Correct? Okay, there is a struggle for existence because this is not, unlimited nahi hai. Okay, it is going to be limited. Okay, and these guys have to fight it out in order to be able to get this. Okay, and now variation. So variation is going to be, let's say that there are only 2 variants. One that is slender and, better suited to this environment. Okay, and then there is this one that is not best suited to this environment. It could be very well suited to, let's say, another environment. Jahan pe, let's say it's like a woodpecker kind of thing. You have to have like thick, strong ones in order to be able to sort of like, dig into that bark, right? So wahan pe this will be the fittest, but not here, not in this particular environment. For this particular environment, this is the fittest and this not fit. So what happens happens is that, over a period of time, so variation hua, okay, and which is the fittest? We've decided that, we can see that this is the fittest, and if it is the fittest, basically it is going to survive. It is going to survive long enough to be able to sort of reach reproductive age and then be able to reproduce, and it has basically been able to reproduce a lot more, and that's exactly uska vice versa hoga yahan pe. It is not able to live long enough to be able to survive, to be able to reproduce and be able to pass on those particular traits to the next generation. So inke population kam hote rahenge, and inke population बढ़ते rahenge, and eventually you can say that the population has evolved, okay, with respect to the beaks. Okay, you understood? Is this kind of clear? Yes, this island is called Galapagos Islands. So ye wala island jo hai, these are the famous, okay, Galapagos Islands. Okay, this is the Galapagos Islands, and this is your South America. Okay, is this kind of clear? And when did he do this? In fact, he basically does this whole kind of, this trip, when he was right out of college. And how many years he basically did this for? The entire trip was about 5 years. He basically collected a lot of these kind of peaks case specimen. Okay, he did not publish the ideas just yet, but once he started studying them, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 13. He's seeing so many of these kind of varieties, okay, depending upon the number of islands. In each of those islands, wherever you have a different kind of an environment, that species had eventually become so different, okay, that it become completely differing kind of species, or a different kind of species. So the species from the ancestral species to here, it had basically evolved. So this is basically what it is. Okay, yahan pe I'm going to introduce two words here. Okay, again we'll take a look at it when we reach another topic, evolutionary biology mein. So this is it's also called as divergence. One species has basically diverged to become multiple different kind of species. It also has another name, and that is called adaptive radiation. You don't have to worry about it. You don't even have to write it down if you want. Okay, adaptive radiation. It is also called as adaptive radiation. So one particular species is adapted, depending upon which one is adapted to which kind of environment. It's sort of like it basically radiates in different ways, right? So it is that. It's called adaptive radiation. So both of these things have been Darwin's greatest contribution. His contribution is not only in terms of his field work, it is actually in terms of the idea, and the idea can be summed up in these 5. मतलब अगर आपको ये याद रहेगा ना, okay, so maybe you can put it as OS VSN. ठीक है, ये याद रहेगा, okay, so you're probably going to be able to explain anything in a very logical sort of manner. Basically, all of this is in your handout. Okay, I will tell you which are the ones that you have to sort of like note down. There'll be a couple of blanks. Okay, that'll be like some scholar names and something. Okay, and anytime we have to do that, I'll basically explain that as well. Your evaluator in UPSC is not going to think कि कितना facts dump किया है student ने. They are basically going to see whether you understand and appreciate the essence of anthropology. One of the greatest ideas of the 19th century. लिखो वहाँ पे. One of the greatest ideas of the 19th century in science. Very difficult thing to do. Like who basically has, as a medical doctor to somebody pursuing arts, who would have gone into religion and pursued, the ideas of creationism, but somehow fate brought an opportunity to basically go away for 5 years. Like, who is going to allow that? And then being able to do that, and then having that interest of collecting things because of the past experience of collecting those beetles, and because of that collecting, specimens of birds, and then having this, and then, that eureka moment, jahan pe, okay, so this is basically what is happening, and giving this particular piece of idea, this set of ideas that, that basically even today, after 150, 60 years, it is still very important. Okay, of course, there are some additions and modifications and so on and so forth, but 150 years, we have such a great sort of idea. Great. Okay, we basically have thoda sa patience because we have to still go through the criticisms. I've basically discussed this part. Okay, let's also take a look at this one. There are some criticisms, of course. Okay, we'll take a look at that. I'll tell you which are the ones that you should basically focus on as well. So what color did we set for things that you have to note down? Light green, no? Write this, okay, and this will be part of your quiz. Because, can you explain is basically what I want to know, right? This though I know ki because, you will be able to see this and okay, agar pad loge to aapko example kuch yaad rahega. You can keep the same thing, matlab frogs ke sath hi pura aap likh sakte ho. There are too many frog ke eggs and tadpoles. Not all of them are going to be able to, what is the second point? The second point is going to be struggle for existence. Not all of them are going to be able to get food and resources and shelter and things like this. Then, you'll basically have variation. Okay, there are some, frogs that are going to be different in some way. Okay, some some of them are going to be better suited for that particular environment, okay, and the ones who are better suited for the environment are basically going to survive long enough and be able to reproduce, and we can eventually say जब वो proportion changes हो जाते हैं, then we can basically say that nature has selected for certain traits. ठीक है? So that is basically what it is. Okay, now you guys can go and criticize, right? So see, one of the main sources of criticism, I've given you a few, okay, doesn't mean that you have to write all of them, but the most important sort of criticism, I'll tell you which one. Okay, the first one is kind of important because he says that there is variation, and variation is basically the starting point, meaning we know that there is overpopulation and then there is struggle for existence, but we don't know Malthus, वो ideas थे, right? So that is there, but we don't know exactly what is the principle behind who's going to survive and who's not going to be able to survive, whom nature is going to select, right? That is the main thing. Okay, so he says, I know for sure that there is variation, okay, in a particular species, right? And then there is going to be some that is going to be fit, and then nature selection, the whole thing is going to be there, but I'm not sure why there is variation. Okay, what is the source of this particular variation? And neither do you, because we are in 1859. 1859, we don't know exactly where this variation comes from. But the good thing is, even that variation, he basically says, "Ki guys, मुझे तो पता है कि there is variation. I am not able to tell." He says, "Ki I'm not able to tell where this variation is coming from." So essentially, he is giving the next sort of a research, proposal, on a platter. He's basically providing it. Now you guys provide, कि उसके बारे में पढ़ के you come out with it. But this is the time जहाँ पे Mendel and certain kind of ideas had not come. We don't know, मतलब powerful microscopes नहीं थे. We can't see, magnified images, right? So much later we had many of these kind of things that basically come. Okay, so mutation के कारण है. So mutation, again, I'm not going to go in right away. Okay, mutation is basically something that was not there for another 40-50 years. We don't know exactly what is mutation. So he basically says all these kind of variations, okay, he names them something called sports. Okay, and he says that I'm not necessarily sure of its origin and so on, but we today know कि mutation क्या है. Mutation is basically with advances in biology or biological sciences, right, we are able to tell what is mutation. Mutation is nothing but change in DNA sequences. Now उसके लिए we have to understand कि DNA क्या है. DNA is basically you guys have to know कि genes क्या है, DNA क्या है. So we have to now jump from this particular topic to a topic called 1.7 and then do the basics of bio, at least the ones that are required for us to be able to study the theories of the post-Darwinian theories. Okay, so वहाँ पे we'll basically start with the cell, we'll go into the chromosomes, and within the chromosomes we'll see what is a gene. Gene के certain parts are basically gene is made up of DNA, and DNA में you have certain sequences called adenine, guanine, AAT, CG. You must have heard of all of these things, at least 9th 10th में आपने touch किया होगा, right? So we'll basically start taking a look at it. उसमें कोई changes है, that is basically mutation. अगर उसमें कोई changes आ रहे हैं, then we are going to be seeing variation. So he does not know at this particular point कि variation क्या है. So but variation as general, he basically gives it a little less importance, but he says कि ढूंढो उसका meaning क्या है, where is it coming from, right? And he basically calls it as sports. Okay. Second one is, and there are some जहाँ पे nature is supposed to select the good features, but sometimes, and this is a common sort of criticism that is provided. Okay, there are some species that actually became extinct, okay, because nature kept selecting. Okay, nature kept selecting for larger antlers and larger antlers, and eventually the antlers got to a point where it is like so heavy, okay, and it became maladaptation rather than good adaptation, right? And eventually this particular species lost out, it died, it went extinct. Okay, and we are not able to explain. Natural selection should basically then sort of again reverse this particular trend, find the variation, find the ones that are smaller, right? Okay, so this guy would basically get caught, if he's going through the forest, right, he's going to get caught here, there. Okay, it's very difficult for him, his neck is not able to balance, ऐसे problems. Okay, it was not. So if nature is selecting only for the best, right, so how does that explain that? Okay, he focused a lot more on competition, which we just talked about, right? There is overpopulation and there is going to be struggle. Okay, and he focuses a lot on competition. Today we know that you don't have to always compete. Okay, now again, it depends on your mindset, right? So biologically speaking, right? So environment आपने पढ़ा होगा, right? So in case you're in symbiosis with another sort of species, both of you will have a good time. Okay, both of you go together, both of you lose together. उस type का भी होगा. UPSC also, right? So sometimes UPSC में competition, there's a lot of competition. Sometimes it is good, it pushes you, but sometimes having somebody cooperate करके एक साथ करेंगे तो maybe you can achieve a little more in life. Okay, उसी type का. So basically his focus was a lot more on competition and not on mutualism or symbiosis. Basically it is like two species basically supporting each other. This is another one. This also आप star mark कर लो. Okay, so this essentially is the fact that the same criticism that we provided for Mendel, the fact that he was not able to explain the genetics behind it. How can he explain? He's in 1859. Okay, he did his research in 1820s and 1830s. 1830s मान लो, right? That is that. And eventually he did not publish his material because he did not want to go against the social, political, religious sort of establishment, right? But then eventually there was another sort of a scholar. His name is Alfred Russel Wallace. Alfred Russel Wallace, he came out with this particular idea. Okay, and then he had basically published it, and he came to know that, hey, this guy has the same sort of idea, right? So then they basically talk, and then Darwin basically immediately gets out his typewriter, and then he starts like writing. Actually, it must have been handwritten, right? But then he comes out and then he says, okay, I'm publishing this entire sort of material, okay, and I have done my field work 2 decades before this kid basically came out with his idea, okay. But he then writes, and then he says that Alfred Russel Wallace also has come out with this idea independently, okay. So but the main idea actually belongs to Darwin because he's the first person to basically talk about that. Okay, and then there is another one which is your gradualism. Okay, so he says that this is a slow process, over many generations and so on. Okay, and again, this is a topic that we will see in another topic, iske bare mein, which is basically punctuated equilibrium. Generally, this is not a very slow kind of process. Basically, evolution happens through a punctuated equilibrium. It actually means that there is no evolution, then suddenly there is a lot of evolution. There is a lot of evolution. Okay, sudden, okay, and then वो change हो रहा है, and then उसके बाद, and then again, it basically comes to a point जहाँ पे there is no evolution for a long time. Suddenly there is a lot of evolution, okay, and we have seen this in humans also, right? So 1.5 million years ago, we had a particular kind of species which was Homo habilis, which didn't look more like us, even though it belongs to the family of the genus Homo, right? But suddenly, with the ability to get that controlled use of fire, right? Okay, that controlled use of fire, and cooked food, there is certain lot of changes that happened in humans. Okay, and this was the phase of Homo erectus. Suddenly the brain sizes are increasing, the fingers are basically having a lot more dexterity, you're able to use tools a lot better, you're creating a lot more newer kind of tools. Your legs are becoming longer than your arms for the very first time. But if you see other chimpanzee and your orangutans वगैरह देखोगे ना, their arms are much longer than their legs. Okay, but this is the first time we actually have that in the hominin line, the human evolutionary line. The legs are becoming longer than the arms, right? You take a look at yourself. Okay, the legs are much longer than your arms, wala thing. So you'll see a lot of difference basically happen. So at some points you'll have very rapid sort of evolution. Some periods it basically does not happen. Okay, if there is an environment change, if there is some sort of something happens in the environment, sometimes it can basically result in a fast change. Okay, and sometimes it can seem like it is stable for long without any kind of evolution. So there are these kind of criticisms. When you're writing your answer, does not mean you have to fit every one of these things. Okay, remember कि depends on the size of कितना आपको लिखना है. It really depends on this. Do mention this wala point. You can mention that Irish elk deer wala example also. Or the most important one is the fact that he did not know the source of variation. Okay, he could not explain the source of variation. Okay, so that is the next one. This is the main sort of idea. Agar aapko, in case you have a long answer, you can basically try to classify it in this kind of manner: overproduction, struggle for variation, survival of the fittest, and natural selection. Actually, this particular sequence of ideas you can use to explain any kind of natural selection. Okay, there is another example. Okay, this is also a classical example, and this example, just note down the name of this person. Kettlewell. Okay, Kettle well, Well, same name hai, Kettlewell. Okay, so what is happening here is that one thing that they actually noticed was industrial melanism. Okay, again, this is something that we will see in genetic polymorphism and natural selection, jahan pe you are going to take a look at natural selection once you already have the knowledge of basic post-Darwinian, all the basics of bio karne ke baad. Okay, so what is polygenic and polymorphism, okay, genetic polymorphism, ये सब हम देखेंगे, right? So वहाँ पे there are some concepts, but वो ये वहाँ का slide है. So basically what is happening is that previously there used to be a kind of a moth. Okay, this is called a peppered moth. Yeah, उसका technical name is basically Biston betuloria. Okay, so what they used to see is that this used to be somewhere in the lightish color shade. Can you guys see this is light in color? Of course, light with some dark patches. But eventually what happened? Okay, this is a prey. The predator are basically these birds. So this was in Western Europe, and it's generally cold here, and it's a environment ka background is basically like snow-capped, kind of streets and all of this. So sometimes you don't necessarily are able to see this that easily. So in case you are somewhere up there and you're a bird and you're trying to look for food, okay, there's a lot difficult to see this, to spot this, because पीछे it is like white, so camouflage हो रहा है. This is basically what it was. Suddenly what happened is that industrial revolution picked up. Industrial revolution, you guys know, whenever you have industries, kya aayega? Okay, beside you, you will see a lot of pollution that is taking place. So a lot of the soot and all, the smoke and soot basically started sort of like piling up. So yahan pe the background started becoming a lot darker. So once this thing became a lot darker, okay, then the skin, right, the light colored peppered moth became a lot easier to sort of spot, and all the light colored ones are basically getting killed and eaten by the birds. You get it, right? So all of them become this thing, right? It becomes a lot easier to spot. So what, okay, in the beginning, okay, in that variation, the lighter colored ones had an advantage because they could camouflage against the snow, the lighter colored skin, whatever, the lighter colored background, right? Then eventually, once that industrial revolution happened, and then you have a lot of the smoke and all of these kind of things, it is basically sort of like, making the background color a lot more grayish in color. So what happened? So if you have lightish color, it is a lot easier to spot against a dark background. So these things started becoming not the fittest anymore. So any sort of variants that were of the darker type, they started becoming fittest because they were not easily spotted. So then what happens? These guys basically live all the way till reproductive age, and they're able to sort of, survive till reproductive age and then produce more offspring and pass on that traits more and more. Right. So again, this is an example that we will see in the next topic. But again, I wanted to give you this as an example here. So there are many examples that you will be able to see. And I think I have already given you the questions. Okay, so one question about Lamarck, all you got to do, I've given you 3 questions. 2 questions are mandatory assignments. One is a 15 marker about Lamarckism, and the other question is going to be a 15 marker of Darwinism. You can just follow that exact, whatever structure that I've given you, just stick with it. But 15 lines per page and no more, max 16 lines per page. Okay, provided you have average handwriting wala this thing. Okay, not more lines than that. And I don't want you to pack too many words in a particular this thing either. And it has to be written within those UPSC sheets. Jahan pe 1.5 inch ka you leave a border, right? So all of this is basically what you do. And then another one is that the third one is kind of agar time hai to ab kijiye. It is how Darwinism basically is different from Lamarckism. Okay, and I don't want you to read anything else. I just want you to be able to take the same example. Either take the example of the finch and say how it is different. Okay, how would Lamarck explain it, and then how Darwin explained it. Yeah, take the giraffe and explain how Lamarck explained it and how Darwin would basically explain it differently. That is a lot more scoring than many more points and other things, right? So unko conceptual clarity dikhna hai. Okay, this is the conceptual clarity. Is this clear? Okay. We can pause and take a look at this, okay, in case you want to write an answer to this particular question, okay. Generally, when you have a question comparing 2 things, you have to write what is A, what is B, and something about A and B, okay. So that is the general sort of idea. Okay, so I told you, right? So this is basically a student who has explained giraffe. Okay, itna draw karna mushkil hoga, but again, just to get yourself a lot more sort of comfortable, right? So you have Lamarckism, how Lamarck had basically explained this, and Darwinism. So she basically says, see, so there is a variety of long necks. Okay, yahan pe itna, this is medium, this is short, this is long. Okay, taller one basically could eat more, and then that means that the short neck giraffe basically gets eliminated, and eventually you see natural selection, meaning there is only one particular kind of species that is a lot more sort of prevalent. And this one to humne already dekha hai. This is one thing, okay. And how do you draw diagrams? Okay, you guys, matlab aise bhi draw kar sakte ho, just to give you some idea, okay. Or you can use a diagram that I had basically done in class. The next one is going to be, see, for instance, this is another student. Okay, the student, matlab first mains. Okay, one of the toppers in anthropology, although did not complete the paper, right? And primarily, would focus a lot more class than the valuation from the next program, which is a test series. She would basically stick with this because she was a lot more comfortable. Okay, one of the toppers in anthropology, pehle means me. Okay, this is something that I would want you to sort of follow along the same footsteps. She does not want to read more. Okay, which kind of helps, itna padhne ke liye hai. So that is that. This is another one. So for instance, Lamarckism and Darwinism, you could basically explain it in this kind of manner. Okay, so you can see now this is the length of the page. Okay, अच्छे से neatly आप कर सकते हो. You can just read through this. Okay, it's just sample. This is not evaluated one, and that is all I have for today.